14 years ago, a 16-year-old girl in Nashville vanished right in her own backyard, disappearing without a trace, leaving her entire family plunged into despair and a community shattered by not knowing what had happened. At the time, authorities suspected it was just a runaway case, and because no body or any significant clues were found to pursue, the investigation quickly stalled. However, throughout all those years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, still clinging to the slim chance that her daughter might still be out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Then one day, while reviewing an old piece of evidence that seemed utterly meaningless, she noticed a crucial detail that everyone had previously overlooked. A detail powerful enough to change the entire case and shock everyone involved in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this deeply shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit subscribe. The Antioch neighborhood, southeast of Nashville, in September 2012, had the characteristic tranquility of a suburb. Small streets lined with oak trees, rows of single-story homes, quietly standing side by side, and everyday life moving at a slow, steady pace. In that setting, Haley Brooks, a 16-year-old sophomore at the local high school, lived with her father, Daniel Brooks, in a one-story house at the end of Cedarview Drive. Haley's family had once been more complete, but after the divorce, her mother, Caroline Miller, moved to Louisville, leaving Haley and her two older brothers to grow up almost entirely under Daniel's care. At school, Haley was described by friends as reserved, quiet but polite. At home, she played the role of the only daughter, quietly adapting to the strict rules Daniel set. September 18th began like any ordinary day. Haley went to school in the morning, stayed an extra hour at the library to finish a group assignment, then got a ride home from a friend around 5 p.m. The evening unfolded in its familiar routine, a simple dinner, Haley retreating to her room to do homework, Daniel watching the news in the living room. The period after 8 p.m. saw a few sounds coming from the house, but neighbors still considered them routine. A door slamming shut, hurried footsteps on the porch, then the garage light coming on briefly. No one directly witnessed what happened during that time, except that someone saw Haley's figure heading toward the backyard before disappearing from view. That night passed without anyone in the house, realizing her absence had become unusually prolonged. The next morning, when Daniel knocked on her door and got no response, he initially assumed she had left early or stayed over at a friend's house, as she sometimes did. However, upon checking further and finding no signs that Haley had left the house in the usual way, worry began to spread. Haley's two brothers were called over, and all three tried contacting friends, neighbors, and checking places she might go, but gathered no information. That unusual silence made the atmosphere in the house grow heavy. After several hours of fruitless internal searching, Daniel faced an unavoidable choice. He called the police, beginning the official record that Haley Brooks, the 16-year-old girl from Cedarview Drive, had vanished without a trace. Daniel Brooks's call was transferred to the Metro Nashville Police Department's dispatch center late in the morning of September 19, 2012, starting with a brief report that his daughter had left the house the previous evening and not returned. The call taker followed standard procedure, confirming the caller's identity, address, last time the victim was seen, and circumstances of the disappearance. At that time, spontaneous teenage runaways were still common in the area, so the intake department classified urgency levels according to the fairly rigid criteria of 2012. Haley was 16, had no special medical history, was not reported to have serious issues with friends or school, and there was no information indicating prior threats. This meant the initial file was not classified as especially urgent, though Daniel's anxious tone was noted in the additional comments section. When the first patrol unit arrived at the Brooks home, they encountered a family in distress, but nothing yet indicated anything beyond a teenager missing overnight. Daniel restated the information given over the phone, the context of the previous evening, Haley's habits, his reaction that morning when he didn't see her. Haley's two brothers were present, and assisted by providing small details, places she might go, close friends, and the fact that she hadn't taken any important personal items, including her wallet and phone. Police noted this could suggest Haley left unprepared, but under the standards of the time, that lack of preparation was still insufficient to upgrade the file to high-risk status. The patrol unit began collecting basic information per protocol: description of Haley's appearance, height, weight, clothing, last seen wearing, identifying features, family situation, social relationships, and any recent stressful events. Daniel mentioned there had been some tense exchanges between him and his daughter the previous evening, but described it as part of minor family conflicts and not directly linked to her disappearance. The officer recorded the detail but did not probe further due to no clear signs of criminal behavior. After completing the information collection, police created an initial file under the code Missing Juvenile, attaching the exact report time, victim description, and initial risk-related factors. This description was entered into the internal system for access by other patrol units in the area. Upon finishing the initial intake step, the field team made preliminary notes on the home's condition, family members' demeanor, and environmental factors that might affect the initial case assessment. Although no clear signs of danger to Haley had emerged, the ambiguity of the disappearance circumstances and the prolonged absence forced police to consider conducting a scene evaluation rather than treating it solely as a voluntary runaway. From there, the patrol unit moved to the field survey phase, in which the Brooks family home and backyard area were identified as the first scene requiring detailed documentation. The goal was not to search for crime evidence in the strict sense, but to establish an overall picture of Haley's last living space before vanishing, as a baseline for comparison to detect any noteworthy anomalies. Officers recorded the condition of the front and back doors. Neither showed signs of prying, breaking, or heavy force, hinges intact, locks functioning normally. The back door leading to the yard remained slightly ajar, which Daniel stated was entirely possible, since the family often left it unlocked on cool evenings. Inside the house, the living room was tidy with no items displaced. The kitchen area was clean, dishes washed or no unfinished meal indicating sudden interruption. Haley's bedroom was at the end of the hallway, door open. Inside, the bed was neatly made. Desk had books and a laptop orderly placed. No signs of hasty searching or physical struggle. The closet door was partially open, clothes hanging evenly inside. No indication of rummaging or multiple items taken at once. This was significant because it reinforced the assessment that if Haley left voluntarily, she took no luggage or essential items. Next to the desk sat a pair of sneakers in their proper place, making the detail of a shoe found outside in the yard noteworthy, but not yet verifiable without comparison. The hallway and adjacent rooms had no dirty footprints, scratches on floors or walls, nor signs of items being knocked around. The survey team moved to the backyard, described as the last place Haley was seen. The backyard was moderately sized, enclosed by a wooden fence, one section aged but not broken, only slightly gapped where it met trees behind. The ground showed shoe impressions in the damp soil, but as a frequently used area, the timing of the prints could not be determined. Some patches of grass were pushed aside, as if someone passed through, but no drag marks or long furrows appeared. The garage light on the right side of the backyard had its switch and bulb in normal condition, no breakage or burn marks, supporting that the light coming on as witnessed could be accurate. The path to the garage was concrete covered with fine sand, showing no slip marks, falls, or signs of struggle. The garage door was closed with no signs of external force or prominent fingerprints. Throughout the entire backyard, the survey team found no strange objects or clear signs of criminal activity, at least at the level observable by eye and per standard procedure, without advanced forensic tools at this stage. All observations reflected a normal living environment, undisturbed or heavily disordered. This factor made assessment more difficult, as Haley's disappearance left no typical signs of a struggle or conflict within the home premises. Nevertheless, per operational guidelines, the survey team still had to complete a detailed scene description, including layout sketch, photos of each area, notes on lighting conditions, relevant items, window door status, and possible access directions. The purpose of this document was to create a foundation for later cross-analysis when additional data was added and compared. Although no overt criminal signs had been found, Haley's prolonged absence and lack of direct clues compelled police to maintain caution, considering that any small detail in the seemingly normal scene could become significant when fitted with subsequent information. After completing the initial scene survey, the investigative team shifted to collecting witness statements from those living near the Brooks home, a crucial step to determine if the surrounding area had recorded any unusual activity during the time Haley vanished. Police approached each household within a few houses' radius to gather information they might have inadvertently observed. The first witness was an elderly woman living right next door to the Brooks, who said she heard intermittent arguing around after 8 p.m., but the voices were not clear enough to identify content or participants. She only recalled the arguing starting then stopping abruptly, followed by a door slamming hard. Since family activity sounds were common in the area in the evenings, she did not consider it unusual at the time. The neighbor behind the Brooks yard provided a different detail. He was letting his dog out when he saw the garage light come on briefly, around 8:20 p.m. He did not see anyone, just the light spilling from the garage into the yard, then everything went dark again as normal. This detail aligned with the scene description that the lighting system was not faulty, but still insufficient to identify who turned it on. A household 2 houses away reported hearing hurried footsteps on the concrete path leading to the back of the Brooks house, sounding like someone running or moving quickly. However, their recalled timing was vague, roughly between 8 o'clock and 8:30, making the information more referential than a precise timestamp. Another witness, a middle-aged man, who regularly walked in the evenings, reported seeing the silhouette of a young person in the backyard area of the Brooks home, but only for a few seconds before it vanished toward the fence. He was not sure if it was Haley due to the distance and dim light. However, he confirmed the timing was around 8:15 p.m., as he always left home for his walk at a fixed time. From the collected statements, police cross-referenced and compiled a timeline summary. The most consistent data point was the garage light appearing around 8:20 p.m., mentioned by at least 2 witnesses with relatively high consistency. The arguing after 8 p.m. was also confirmed by 1 witness, matching Daniel's statement of tension between him and his daughter that evening. Details about movement, footsteps, and the figure in the backyard, though not fully uniform, all centered around the 8 o'clock to 8:30 p.m. window, forming a key time frame for analysis. When assessing statement reliability, investigators based it on observation capability, memory consistency, witness routines, and cross-report alignment. The garage light witness was rated high reliability due to fixed walking habits and matching equipment description. The elderly woman's account of arguing was rated medium reliability, sound fit the context, but lacked specifics. Statements about movement in the backyard were rated as reference level due to unclear identity of the mover and approximate timing. After compilation and classification, police prepared a witness report with an initial assessment that the Brooks home area did indeed experience some unusual activity between 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m., including sounds, light, and movement, but no seamless sequence had formed to draw conclusions. These statements were filed for use in subsequent analysis steps when supporting information emerged, especially if new data could connect the fragmented timepieces into a more complete chain of events. Based on the collected witness statements and initial on-site survey results, the police moved to the step of creating a search area diagram to determine a reasonable scope for deploying forces. This phase requires evaluating both terrain factors and possible behaviors during the time Haley went missing. The map of the area around the Brooks residence was enlarged based on the city's geographic data, delineating a radius of 1 to 2 kilometers from the backyard. The point considered the last location where a witness saw a figure matching Haley's size. Within the first 1 kilometer radius, police marked areas with high accessibility and frequent pedestrian traffic, such as main roads, sidewalks, front yards of neighboring houses, and the segment connecting Cedarview Drive to a larger street. These were points to be checked early to rule out the possibility that Haley had spontaneously moved along easily observable routes. However, the fact that many hours had passed from the time of disappearance until the police were called led the investigative team to assess that if any traces had been left on the road surface, the early morning activities of residents had significantly obscured them. Within the 1-2 kilometers radius, police paid particular attention to secluded areas with low lighting and complex terrain structures, places where a person could enter or be taken without being easily detected. The wooded area behind the Brooks house was the first priority location, as witnesses reported movement and footsteps heading in that direction. This wooded patch, though not very large, featured dense bushes, several unmarked small paths, and clearings rarely noticed by outsiders. It was rated as a medium to high risk area because pedestrians could pass through without being seen from the street. Next, authorities identified the trail running parallel to the row of houses behind as one of the potentially relevant routes. This trail was used by local residents for walking or jogging, but at night it was quite dark and saw little traffic. It connected directly to an intersection leading toward Long Hunter State Park, raising the possibility that Haley, or someone taking Haley, may have moved in that direction. The third high-priority location was the access paths to the lake in the area bordering Percy Priest Lake. Although more than 1 km from the Brooks house, the lake access system was poorly screened and within range that a person moving hurriedly could reach in a few dozen minutes. The lakeside terrain also posed risks due to the wide water surface, uneven shores, and many overgrown sections. After classifying locations by priority and risk level, police began developing the search team deployment plan with 3 main directions. The first direction focused on the woods behind the house, with the task of sweeping each strip of trees horizontally and checking clearings that could conceal traces of movement. The second direction handled a full sweep of the trail, noting footprints, foreign objects, or any signs indicating recent nighttime passage. The third direction covered the lakeside area, where coordination with the Water Patrol unit would be added if necessary to observe from the water surface. The coordination team established a specific schedule for each group to avoid overlap and ensure data was recorded in logical order. Each search team was required to carefully document checked locations, scene photographs, and collected objects for later analysis. Before departure, the entire team reviewed the timeline from witness statements once more. The period from approximately 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. was critical, so the search route focused on areas where Haley could have been present during that time frame. The final plan was approved right at the Brooks residence scene, marking the transition from the observation phase to an active large-scale search phase, with the goal of identifying the first trace that could clarify Haley's direction of movement after she was last seen. The search teams began carrying out their tasks immediately after the plan was approved, using the backyard of the Brooks house as the central starting point. From there, they followed the areas rated as having the highest likelihood of relevance based on witness statements and the risk analysis diagram created in the previous step. Their immediate task was not to explain Haley's disappearance, but to identify any trace that could suggest her direction of movement after she was last seen. The backyard area was processed first. In daylight, police could more clearly observe the ground texture, bush distribution, and natural paths formed by family members' regular passage. One group focused on checking the strip of land along the wooden fence, where a witness reported seeing a figure, while the other group swept the path leading toward the woods. The soft soil right at the edge of the yard showed many overlapping shoe prints, mostly old ones from routine activity, but the search team noted several prints with deeper compression and heading straight toward a dense cluster of trees. Though not sharply defined, these prints were still considered noteworthy. A few meters from the fence, in a low bush, one group discovered a small object among the fallen leaves, a black athletic shoe, size consistent with someone of Haley's build. The shoe appeared to have been outdoors overnight. Its surface was slightly damp with minimal soil adhesion. There were no tears or deformations suggesting heavy dragging, but the fact that the shoe was found here, separate from the pair located in Haley's bedroom, prompted the search team to immediately seal it and add it to the list of potential evidence. The discovery location was also photographed and recorded, with GPS coordinates for later comparison. Continuing in the direction where the shoe was found, team members moved deeper into the small wooded area behind the house. This was a region with thick undergrowth, where light barely penetrated the canopy, making small ground details harder to see. The search team advanced in a horizontal formation, maintaining even spacing to ensure no paths or movement signs were missed. Because the woods were adjacent to the residential area, pre-existing paths created by locals made distinguishing new from old prints difficult. Nevertheless, several sections of unusually deep compacted soil caused the team to stop and inspect closely, but each check yielded nothing specific beyond dry twigs or decayed leaves. As they advanced deeper, the terrain gradually opened into a clearer clearing where the grass was shorter and the ground flatter. Here, the search team found no signs of struggle, skid marks, or any personal items. This meant the assumption that Haley may have stopped or been held in the near-house wooded area lacked clear support. Additionally, the patrol team paid special attention to listening for distant sounds, considering the possibility that Haley might have called for help during the night, but no one in the vicinity reported similar noises. Upon leaving the woods, the search team shifted to inspecting the entire trail, connecting the area behind the Brooks house to the intersection leading toward Long Hunter State Park. The trail was relatively flat, with many resident shoe prints, making visual differentiation of new versus old nearly impossible. The team observed the ground surface, broken branches, and displaced grass patches for signs of hurried movement, but nothing stood out. One member noted a few lightly indented soft soil sections, but without clear accompanying evidence, they lacked sufficient value for conclusions. Moreover, since the area had seen heavy morning foot traffic, any initial traces would have been easily blurred. This significantly reduced the likelihood of collecting physical evidence on the trail. Extending southeast from the trail, the search team conducted a sweep along a route cutting through low bushes. Here, some wind-blown household trash was found, but no items suggested any connection to Haley. Police also checked hollows under large trees and natural soil depressions, but recorded no specific results. Because this area was commonly used by neighborhood children for play and dog walkers, the space was heavily contaminated by multi-generational footprints, requiring caution in any behavioral interpretations. Concluding the sweep of the backyard, woods, and trail, the search team compiled everything obtained in this first-level search. The shoe was the only object with clear identificatory value, but it could not yet be confirmed as belonging to Haley without official comparison. The shoe prints, indented soil, or displaced grass patches all lacked sufficient basis to describe a specific movement behavior. Overall, the collected data remained too vague to determine how or in which direction Haley had left the backyard. However, the teams agreed that the shoe's appearance was the most noteworthy factor, indicating a high likelihood that Haley or someone connected to her had passed through that area. Police concluded that the Level 1 search, while confirming some related indicators, produced no definitive results regarding Haley's current location or her path after 8 p.m. This meant the case's complexity had increased, as failure to establish an initial direction of movement would make the areas requiring expansion in the next phase larger and harder to control, forcing the investigative team to prepare for a new level of assessment based on current information. When the Level 1 search phase yielded no definitive results, the investigative team shifted focus to analyzing Haley Brooks' behavioral patterns and missing person profile to assess whether her disappearance aligned with trends of teenagers voluntarily leaving home or exhibited characteristics of external influence. The initial baseline data was gathered from Haley's personal records, in which the school described her as a student with above-average performance, no disciplinary history, no involvement in high-risk groups, and consistently punctual attendance. Her homeroom teacher noted that Haley rarely drew attention, preferred to keep distance in interactions, but always showed cooperative attitude. These observations helped the team determine that Haley was not the type prone to getting drawn into risky situations or impulsively running away. Among her friends, Haley was described as reserved but had a few close relationships, especially with two classmates. They stated that Haley had never mentioned wanting to leave home or change her living environment. Emotionally, she had not experienced any major incidents at school recently, nor been ostracized by peers or faced overt social pressure. When examining family dynamics, the investigative team focused on the Brooks household routine. After the divorce, Haley primarily lived with Daniel, her two older brothers had moved out, and her mother lived in Louisville, seeing her only on some weekends. Information from both family and friends indicated that Daniel was somewhat strict in managing his daughter's routine, but no one described Haley having major conflicts severe enough to prompt long-term runaway intentions. Some confirmed she had appeared sad or stressed due to academic pressure and household rules, but the degree did not exceed typical manifestations in many 16-year-olds. The investigative team also examined Haley's behavioral history in the months leading up to her disappearance. There were no records of truancy, overnight runaways, association with high-risk peer groups, or engagement in conflict-prone online activities. Her social media accounts showed low interaction, mainly study-related photos and occasional pet shares. This data showed no psychological or behavioral preparation for a plan to leave home. When cross-referencing the collected information with common teenage missing person patterns, police relied on three main categories: voluntary runaway for rebellion or seeking freedom, runaway due to psychological crisis, and victim of external force, including grooming, coercion, or sudden incident. In the first pattern, teenagers typically prepared in advance by taking money, phone, clothes, or transportation means, along with prolonged signs of family dissatisfaction. In Haley's case, no items were missing, no record showed preparation for absence, and there was no evidence of a major argument immediately before disappearance. The second pattern, runaway due to psychological crisis, often left clear signs such as sudden behavioral changes, social withdrawal, or diary entries, and posts expressing despair. From the gathered information, Haley showed none of these behaviors. Friends described her as only slightly tired in the past week due to a heavier class schedule, but no serious instability. The third pattern, external influence, included cases where acquaintances or strangers approached the victim, cases where the victim was lured out, or incidents occurring after leaving a safe area. The investigative team assessed that factors beyond Haley's control were entirely possible, especially given witness statements reporting unusual movement and sounds around the backyard between 8 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. The discovery of the shoe at the wood's edge further increased the likelihood that Haley had moved or been moved to that area. A teenager running away typically does not lose a shoe en route, making this item a pivotal detail in behavioral assessment. When weighing all the data overall, the investigative team concluded that the possibility of Haley voluntarily leaving home in an active state was almost entirely inconsistent with her behavioral profile and living circumstances. The disappearance lacked preparation signs, clear objectives, psychological instability indicators, or preceding behaviors leading to runaway intent. From this, the team assessed the need to expand focus toward the hypothesis that Haley had left home due to external factors, although at that point, there was still no specific evidence pointing to criminal activity or direct third-party intervention. This conclusion was not intended to determine the cause of the disappearance, but only to guide the next approach more cautiously, as all initial data indicated Haley was not a teenager with a tendency to voluntarily run away without leaving traces. After analyzing the behavior, indicating that Haley's likelihood of voluntarily leaving on her own was very low, the investigative team shifted to evaluating vehicles that could have been involved in her movement during the period she went missing. This was because, if Haley did not leave the area on foot in a walking direction, the use of a vehicle, either from the family or belonging to someone else, needed to be thoroughly examined. The primary focus was Daniel Brooks's dark green Ford Ranger, which was parked in the garage when police arrived at the house on the morning of September 19th. In the initial assessment procedure, officers conducted a non-invasive observation of the vehicle's exterior and interior. The floor area on the passenger side and rear seats was unusually clean compared to the level of use Daniel described, prompting them to note it in the record with the remark requires more detailed inspection if legal grounds exist. The front floor mats showed no stains or dirt sand, even though the backyard and the path leading to the woods had soft, loamy soil that could easily adhere to shoe soles and be tracked into the vehicle. This raised questions, but was not conclusive, as Daniel might have cleaned the vehicle earlier as part of his routine, or he simply had not used it on the night of the disappearance. When asked about his vehicle cleaning frequency, Daniel stated that he usually cleaned it on weekends, but could not recall whether he had done so before the day Haley went missing. Investigators noted this uncertainty, but did not treat it as evidence, since witnesses' memories of routine matters are often unreliable. In addition to Daniel's vehicle, 2 other vehicles in the vicinity were added to the screening list, an old SUV belonging to the neighbors across the street, and a sedan frequently parked near the trail entrance. The SUV owner confirmed it had not been used in the past 2 days and allowed a quick visual check. Nothing unusual in terms of stains or items was observed. The sedan, belonging to a renter in the area, was confirmed to have been used that evening, but only for a trip to a nearby supermarket. The transaction receipt matched the account and showed no inconsistencies. After reviewing vehicles within the close radius, the investigative team refocused on the Ford Ranger, as it was the only vehicle directly linked to the victim through family relationship, and Daniel had unrestricted access to it without needing to involve others. However, at this stage, with no clear signs of criminal activity, police lacked authority to impound or seize the vehicle for forensic examination, as 2012 law required specific evidence or stronger probable cause, such as the presence of objects suspected to be related to a crime or serious conflicting statements. The mere fact that the vehicle was unusually clean did not provide sufficient justification for seizure, as it could infringe on Daniel's property rights and privacy. Nevertheless, recognizing the importance of vehicles in any missing person scenario, the investigative team decided to create a separate technical file for the Ford Ranger. This file included detailed descriptions of the exterior and interior condition, parking position, dust levels, shoe prints, and any features that could change over time. They photographed the vehicle from all angles, recorded the VIN, license plate number, and tire wear patterns, and noted the weather conditions over the preceding 2 days, as these could affect future trace evidence collection. Establishing this technical file was a necessary preparatory step to ensure that if legal grounds for in-depth examination emerged later, original reference data would still be available for comparison. Additionally, police documented Daniel's vehicle usage habits, his typical departure times from home, and usual routes. Although it could not be proven that the vehicle was directly involved in Haley's disappearance, collecting this baseline data helped build a reference model to cross-check the consistency of future statements if necessary. At the conclusion of the vehicle assessment phase, police obtained no clear evidence, but the presence of a few minor anomalies was sufficient to keep the Ford Ranger under technical monitoring. In a context of limited information, the lack of grounds for impoundment did not mean the vehicle was ruled out of suspicion. Instead, it was recorded as a potentially relevant factor, requiring continued observation as new facts emerged. After completing the screening of potentially relevant vehicles, the investigative team returned to focusing on Daniel Brooks's official statement. As in any residential missing person case, the guardian's account typically serves as the first reference point for reviewing events before and after the victim's disappearance. This statement-taking session required Daniel to provide as detailed a timeline as possible, including his activities during the afternoon and evening of September 18th, people he had contact with, times he was at home, any unusual changes to his daily routine, and any sounds or movements he might have heard or seen during the relevant period. Daniel began describing from late afternoon. He said he returned home around 5:30 p.m., saw Haley in her room, and noticed nothing unusual. He ate a simple dinner around 6 p.m., while Haley ate later because she was doing homework. From about 6:30 to 8 p.m., he said he watched the news in the living room, occasionally passing through the hallway, but not recalling exact times. When asked to describe the period from 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., a critical window according to neighbors' accounts, Daniel said he only remembered hearing a small noise from Haley's room, but thought it was normal activity sounds. He denied hearing, arguing, running, or any other significant movement. From around 8:30 to 9 p.m., Daniel stated that he went to his bedroom to rest early, then fell asleep until waking at 6 a.m. the next morning and realizing Haley was not in her room. Police continued to press Daniel for precise times when he moved around the house or checked the clock, but he repeated that he did not remember minute-by-minute details and could only provide approximate time frames. The entire statement was recorded and cross-checked against witness data. Quick comparison revealed several inconsistencies. Witnesses reported hearing arguing or a loud door slam sometime after 8 p.m. While Daniel described everything as normal, 2 witnesses noted the garage light on around 8:20 p.m., but Daniel made no mention of entering the garage or seeing light coming from it. One witness reported seeing a figure moving near the fence around 8:15 to 8:20 p.m., while Daniel insisted he did not leave the living room during that time. Additionally, the absence of any specific details about Daniel's activities from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., an hour considered pivotal, made the statement lack the sharpness typically expected from someone recalling clearly what they did on the evening before a disturbing event. Nevertheless, under 2012 legal and procedural standards, the existence of discrepancies between the statement and civilian testimony was not sufficient to establish formal suspicion. Witness accounts can be vague, neighbors' memories may be off by minutes or misinterpret sounds, and inconsistencies in Daniel's account could reflect inaccurate recall of an evening when he had not yet noticed anything unusual. Police required physical evidence or more blatant contradictions before considering elevating suspicion toward the guardian. Therefore, investigators recorded all these discrepancies as unresolved factors, filed for further review when additional supporting data emerged. In the internal report, they concluded that Daniel's statement did not narrow the investigative direction, but also lacked sufficient grounds to assert that he was concealing anything. His level of cooperation was assessed as adequate but lacking detail, a common intermediate rating for householders under stress from an unexpected incident. Based on that outcome, the investigative team summarized that the timeline Daniel provided retained reference value but could not be treated as the definitive time frame, and it needed cross-verification with other information sources to more accurately determine what occurred during the period Haley went missing. With Daniel Brooks's statement failing to narrow the investigative direction and level 1 searches around the home yielding no definitive results, authorities decided to expand the scope to the next area deemed potentially relevant, Long Hunter State Park and the shores of Percy Priest Lake, which were within a reasonable travel distance if Haley or someone else had taken her out of the residential area on foot between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. This represented a significant shift from searching concentrated in the family living space to approaching larger and more complex areas where terrain conditions could conceal traces in a short time. In the early afternoon of September 20th, the coordination team divided forces into 3 groups. One assigned to the trail connecting from the back of the residential area to the park edge. One advancing into the sparse and dense wooded sections of Long Hunter State Park, and the third sent to the lakeside areas near the Day Loop Trail, where many unofficial water access points lacked barriers. Although nearly 24 hours had passed since Haley's disappearance, police still hoped to find physical traces or personal items left behind. The trail team began by walking the length of the natural path leading from the Brooks house to the park. Although this path was frequently used by residents on foot, the soft soil mixed with sand could retain shoe prints under low disturbance conditions. However, due to morning pedestrian and pet activity, many prints were overlapped, allowing the team only to note some deeper than normal soil compressions. These impressions ran from the residential area toward the park, but lacked distinctive features like unique tread patterns, preventing source identification. Along the trail, searchers recovered two small light blue fabric scraps caught on low branches, spaced a few hundred meters apart. Although similar in material, they were too small to determine whether they came from Haley's clothing. Investigators collected them for later testing and recorded the locations via GPS. Apart from the two scraps, the trail area yielded no other noteworthy objects. The second team moved deeper into Long Hunter State Park, where the terrain was expansive, vegetation thick, and light coverage made searching significantly more complex. To avoid missing anything, the team divided the area into horizontal sweep lanes, spaced a few meters apart, ensuring full ground coverage. However, with many unofficial paths in the woods, fresh traces were hard to distinguish from older ones. Many ground disturbances were assessed as footprints from daytime hikers or joggers, lacking evidentiary value. Farther out in one lane, the team noted a round depression about 12 centimeters in diameter, suspected to be a footprint but distorted by light rain the previous night. Nearby, they found a black hair tie caught in low brush. Since Haley commonly used hair ties in daily life, this item was collected and added to the list of samples for comparison, though its location, far from the nearest route from the house, kept the team cautious in its assessment. Additionally, a thin plastic bag blown by wind against a tree root was noted but ruled unrelated after inspection. The third team, responsible for the lakeside area, assessed it as higher risk because the water environment and uneven shoreline could quickly obscure objects or erase traces. They started from unofficial water access points created by residents and visitors over time. With the shoreline extensive and terrain uneven, the team focused on areas easily accessible from trails or main park routes. During the sweep, they found an old can, a piece of tissue paper, and two recently broken branches, but none suggested a connection to Haley. At one lakeside clearing, searchers identified several elongated soil slide marks, about 1 meter long, but the soft, water-saturated soil made further assessment uncertain. One member also noted faint shoe prints heading toward the water's edge, but the shape was unclear and mixed with morning visitors' footprints. After sweeping the entire designated lakeside area, the team concluded there were no signs of violence or discarded personal items at these points. When the three teams regrouped and reported, the consolidated results showed that Level 2 searching, though covering a larger and more detailed scope, still produced no definitive evidence. Items recovered, such as fabric scraps, the hair tie, and the shoe from Level 1 searching, had possible relevance but lacked conclusiveness. More importantly, the entire wooded area, trails and lakeside showed no clear signs of violence, no evidence of struggle, drag marks, blood, or items indicating the victim had been attacked at these locations. From an operational perspective, this was both helpful and limiting, helpful in ruling out conflict occurring in the park or lakeside areas, but limiting in failing to provide a new direction for Haley's movement. The absence of clear signs forced police to conclude that Level 2 searching, despite significantly expanding the scope, had not determined where the victim had gone or what might have happened after 8 p.m., meaning the next investigative direction would rely primarily on indirect data rather than field evidence. When physical field searches yielded no clear results and showed no signs of violence in the forested areas, trails, or lakeside zone, the investigative team shifted focus to digital data related to Haley Brooks, treating it as a supplementary source that might suggest her movements or behavior leading up to the disappearance. However, it must be emphasized that 2012 was a period when smartphone technology was still limited, particularly in terms of storing location data, automatic backups, or real-time user activity logging. Investigators seized Haley's phone, an older iPhone model found in her bedroom, and reviewed all accessible data. The first key detail established was the time the device lost connection. Activity logs showed the phone stopped receiving signals at 8:17 p.m. on September 18th. Police could not determine whether the disconnection resulted from the device being powered off, the battery dying, or physical interference, as the phone showed no external signs of damage. The timing of the shutdown or disconnection, close to the window when witnesses reported unusual sounds, made this information significant, but the timestamp itself provided no context or purpose for the phone going inactive. The team continued reviewing messages, call logs, and notes. The last sent message occurred in the afternoon on the day Haley went missing, consisting of an exchange with a classmate about a group assignment. No messages indicated anxiety, plans to leave home, or contact with strangers. One unsent draft message was composed around 7:52 p.m., but never sent. Its content consisted only of a few disjointed words with no specific information, possibly because Haley was interrupted while typing or experienced a network issue. The call history also revealed nothing unusual. The most recent call was to a friend early in the evening of September 17th, and there were no contacts from unknown numbers or rejected calls on September 18th. This indicated Haley had no noteworthy phone interactions leading up to her disappearance. Regarding social media activity, Haley's account was fairly inactive. Her last post was 3 days before the disappearance, consisting simply of a photo of schoolwork and a few casual lines. There were no negative statuses, no private messages signaling a crisis, and no ongoing conversations with people outside her known circle. Her profile showed no signs of threats, harassment, or involvement in risky online groups. Social media platforms at the time also did not store detailed login location data, so investigators could not determine where Haley's device had been active before losing connection. Examination of email and school documents likewise produced no leads. There was no search history or website activity, suggesting Haley was planning to leave home or had contact with anyone outside her familiar environment. All digital data portrayed a teenager with a stable routine and no unusual signs in the days leading up to the disappearance. Although information from Haley's phone and social media was collected comprehensively, the investigative team was forced to conclude that technological data in this case was very weak, lacking depth, and provided little assistance in narrowing down her movements or identifying a motive for the disappearance. Available analytical tools also could not recover deleted or overwritten data to modern standards, severely limiting any possibility of uncovering digital traces. From an investigative perspective, this meant the search for Haley had to continue relying on field data, witness statements, and behavioral analysis, rather than depending on electronic indicators that 2012 technology was incapable of providing. When digital data failed to provide a clear direction, the investigative team turned to processing community tips, a necessary step in missing person cases in densely populated residential areas. Within just 48 hours of the missing person alert being circulated, police received dozens of calls and messages reporting sightings of Haley at various locations across the Nashville area and nearby regions. However, most early sightings were speculative or driven by public concern, requiring the team to carefully screen them to avoid being led astray. Reported sightings were categorized into 3 main groups: those with partial matching descriptions of Haley's appearance, speculative sightings lacking specific details, and clearly unfounded reports. In the first group, one caller reported seeing a girl resembling Haley at a convenience store in Antioch around 10 p.m. on September 18th. Upon reviewing the store's security footage, police identified it as a different teenager of similar height but with clothing and gait that did not match Haley's description on the day she went missing. Another report claimed a girl who looked like Haley appeared in the parking lot of a small shopping center, but the camera footage was low quality and the recorded time did not align with the last known sighting of the victim. After contacting the person in the video, police confirmed it was simply a local customer. The second group included reports without clear timestamps or with vague descriptions, such as might have seen the girl walking along a trail, Think I saw someone like her at a bus stop or a teenage girl who looked familiar near the school. While these came from good intentions, they could not serve as investigative leads due to the lack of specific facts regarding time, exact location, or clear identifying features. The team followed up with each caller for clarification, but most could not recall precise details or timing, so these sightings were deprioritized. The third group consisted of baseless reports, or those showing clear signs of misidentification. For example, one caller reported seeing Haley in downtown Nashville the following morning, but the person observed had mismatched hair color and height. Another claimed Haley had gotten into a strange man's car, but when investigators requested a vehicle description or driver identification, the tipster could provide no details. Some reports even stemmed from social media rumors, such as Haley was seen in a park late at night, yet no one could verify the source. To avoid wasting resources, the team compiled and categorized a master list, ultimately retaining only 3 sightings with timestamps relatively consistent with the window of Haley's disappearance. The rest were excluded or noted as unusable. A key priority in this phase was minimizing false leads and preventing unverified information from diverting the investigation into unsupported areas. After reviewing all sightings from the first 2 days, police concluded that none provided new traces or revealed Haley's exact path. Although the high volume of sightings might have suggested numerous leads, most created noise and diluted focus. From a professional standpoint, eliminating false information not only conserved resources, but also ensured the investigation was not misguided by unsubstantiated speculation. The team noted that all viable sightings had been processed or verified, and at that point, no tip was strong enough to expand or narrow the search area. Once false or unproductive tips had been addressed without yielding new directions, the investigative team proceeded to synthesize all early-stage data to assess the consistency across pieces of information gathered from the scene, statements, witness accounts, and digital traces. This was a critical step to determine whether Haley Brooks's disappearance was being viewed in the correct scope or constrained by initial assumptions. The team began with field data. The Level 1 search around the home recovered only 1 shoe suspected to have been found in the backyard, with no signs of violence in the yard, nearby woods or trails. Level 2 searches in Long Hunter State Park and along the lake also yielded no clear physical evidence. When combined with the highly limited digital data, the case picture became elusive. The phone lost connection at 8:17 p.m., no unusual messages, contact history suggesting no external interference. Witness statements further complicated the file by suggesting unusual activity between approximately 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m., while conflicting with Daniel's statement that he heard or saw nothing beyond normal household activity. 2 independent witnesses confirmed the garage light was on around 8:20 p.m. Yet Daniel made no mention of this detail and offered no explanation for the light's appearance. Another witness reported arguing sounds, but only at an intermittent level, with no ability to identify content or participants. These facts did not confirm criminal activity, but highlighted unexplained gaps in the timeline directly tied to Haley's disappearance. When analyzing Daniel's timeline, the team noted that key periods, such as 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m., still lacked detail, despite this being the window with the most related sightings. However, inconsistencies in Daniel's recollection could still be attributed to subjective factors. He did not realize his daughter was missing until the next morning, and therefore paid little attention to minor events the previous evening. Nevertheless, investigators noted that the coincidence between his vague account and the anomalies in neighbors' statements warranted closer scrutiny of the file. Upon re-examining the digital footprint, everything indicated a stable teenager with no signs of preparing to leave home, making Haley's disappearance even harder to explain. Meanwhile, the shoe found in the backyard remained the only potentially related item, but there were no signs of struggle or forceful movement around its discovery location, preventing the team from determining whether it was evidence of an incident or simply something dropped earlier. The absence of other personal items, such as the phone, clothing, or jewelry, further heightened the unpredictability of Haley's actions after her last sighting. Upon synthesizing all Phase 1 data, the investigative team concluded that the file contained numerous unresolved contradictions. The Guardian's statement lacked compatibility with witness accounts. The sole potentially related object provided no movement direction. Limited digital data failed to clarify the disconnection context. The scene showed no violence, but also lacked characteristics of a voluntary runaway. Notably, the 8 o'clock to 8:30 p.m. window stood as the intersection of witness statements and the few available traces, yet it lacked authenticating information from inside the home. Recognizing that these gaps might suggest an undetected sequence of events, the team proposed deeper expanded analysis, including forensic examination of Daniel's vehicle and closer scrutiny of related timelines. However, this proposal was not approved at the time due to insufficient clear legal grounds and because current indicators did not yet justify treating the case as criminal. Management assessed that expanding the investigation too early without concrete evidence could infringe on the personal rights of involved parties, particularly the victim's family, while consuming resources without a firm direction. Therefore, the case continued to be classified as active monitoring, but was not escalated to in-depth investigation, leaving the file's contradictions unresolved and unexplained. For many months after the Phase 1 synthesis, Haley Brooks's disappearance showed no new traces, despite authorities maintaining periodic contact with the family and reviewing community reports. Efforts to monitor credit card activity, hospital records, school data, or any reappearance of Haley produced no results. By early 2013, per Metro Nashville Police Department protocol for missing person cases with no progress after 6 months, the file began the process of being considered for cold case status. This did not reflect abandonment, but a professional acknowledgement that current investigative methods had reached their limit. The primary reasons the file could not remain an active investigation stemmed from 3 factors. First, no new physical evidence. Supplemental searches in the park and lakeside areas yielded nothing, and the sole item of evidence, the shoe, still held no established forensic value. Second, no electronic behavioral developments. No credit card activity. No social media logins. No school record requests, all indicating Haley had completely vanished from trackable systems. Third, no specific suspect or clear criminal scenario. While Daniel Brooks's statement contained many ambiguities, it was insufficient to pursue criminally. Witnesses provided no identifying information. The family vehicle lacked grounds for forensic examination. All of this resulted in no legal basis to seek deeper search warrants or expand invasive investigative measures. In a first quarter 2013 evaluation meeting, investigators presented that continuing to maintain the file as active would trap resources in redundant checks of already searched areas without new justification. Proposals such as passive monitoring of Daniel's vehicle or requesting forensic vehicle analysis were again rejected for lack of legal evidence. Therefore, in line with standard resource optimization guidelines, the Haley Brooks case was recommended for transfer to the cold case unit, the specialized unit handling stalled cases, while retaining the potential for reopening upon new data. Upon transfer, the investigative team's primary task shifted from direct pursuit to full documentation of all data to ensure any evidence could be re-examined in the future. All scene reports, statements, witness accounts, search maps, evidence lists, device disconnection timestamps, Daniel's timeline, and excluded sightings were reorganized chronologically. Each document was reviewed for integrity. Scene photos were renumbered. Descriptions of searched areas in Long Hunter State Park were standardized, and evidence items such as the shoe, fabric scrap, and hair tie were long-term sealed in storage. A comprehensive summary report was also drafted to outline the entire investigative process from the day of disappearance to Phase 1 closure. This report detailed every step taken, reasons for ruling out each hypothesis, assessments of source reliability, and unresolved contradictions in the timeline. In particular, unclear points, such as the garage light at 8:20 p.m., reports of arguing sounds, and the shoe's appearance were listed as facts lacking sufficient basis for evaluation to facilitate future review should technology or new information allow broader interpretation. When the file was officially transferred to the cold case unit in mid-2013, this was not an ending but a necessary procedural freeze. The case was archived in both electronic and physical systems, ready to be reopened if new statements, new evidence, or advances in forensic science enabled reanalysis of old data. However, at that time, the Haley Brooks case became an unsolved disappearance, remaining among Nashville's list of unanswered files. When Haley Brooks's case file was transferred to the cold case unit, it remained dormant in the archives for a long period with no new facts to trigger a reinvestigation. However, by late 2019, the cold case unit began implementing a review program for old missing persons cases to assess whether any files had been limited by the technical capabilities available during the initial investigation. During this review process, Haley Brooks's file was placed on the review list due to unexplained inconsistencies in the early phase and the fact that the victim left no digital trace whatsoever after the time of her disappearance. A dedicated team of cold case investigators was assigned to re-examine all materials, from crime scene reports, witness statements, and physical evidence to the raw technological data collected in 2012. Right from the start of the review, they noticed a detail recorded in the reports but never deeply analyzed: the security camera mounted outside the Brooks family's garage. In 2012, home security camera systems were not yet widespread, and the captured footage typically had low resolution, leading the original investigators to deem it of limited technical value. In the archived file, there was only a brief note confirming that the camera had been operational, but recorded nothing noteworthy based on a cursory review of a few frames under low light conditions. The cold case unit recognized this as an indication that the video data may have been undervalued, especially since modern image processing technology can enhance old footage far beyond the standards of 2012. The specialized team requested extraction of the complete original video from storage and transfer to new analysis equipment to determine whether any details had been overlooked due to technical limitations at the time. The extraction process revealed approximately 45 minutes of footage running from 7:55 p.m. to 8:40 p.m., aligning with the critical time window mentioned in neighbors' statements. Notably, the 2012 report only mentioned blurry images, no identifiable activity, without specifying the extent of frame processing performed. When the analyst opened the original video, they realized the camera was not entirely useless. Although the resolution was low and lighting poor, motion blobs could still be identified with image enhancement software. This raised the question of why the video had not previously undergone rigorous analysis, particularly in a missing persons case where activity around the garage during that time frame was considered relevant. Continuing the document review, the cold case unit uncovered another lingering technical issue. The timestamp in the video was synced to the camera's internal clock, but that clock had never been compared to real-world event time. A marginal note in the 2012 file stated that the camera clock was off by a few minutes without specifying the exact deviation. This meant that timestamps derived from the video might be inaccurate when compared to witness timelines or Daniel's statements. In a case where 5-10 minutes could completely alter interpretations of events inside the house, such a time discrepancy could not be dismissed lightly. These findings prompted the cold case unit to reevaluate the entire initial assessment of Haley Brooks's disappearance. Investigators concluded that the case had likely been downplayed in severity due to an underestimation of the video data's potential. Rather than viewing the camera as not useful, the original team had overlooked in-depth analysis that could have revealed human movement, garage lighting, or door activity, all elements mentioned in neighbors' statements. The inconsistency between the unanalyzed video data, witness accounts of the garage light turning on around 8:20 p.m., and Daniel's claim that he did not enter the garage, led to the determination that the original file contained overlooked points. From this, the cold case unit concluded that Haley's disappearance was not only constrained by a lack of evidence, but also by technical tools insufficiently advanced to evaluate critical data. This placed the file in the category of cases potentially misjudged in severity during the initial phase, a key criterion for considering reopening an investigation when technology permits. In early 2020, after determining that the 2012 video data had likely been misjudged, the Cold Case Unit forwarded the entire original file to the department's Image Analysis Division, where next-generation video enhancement techniques enabled processing of low-quality frames that had previously been nearly impossible to exploit. The 45-minute video underwent frame stabilization, noise reduction, contrast enhancement, and dark area reconstruction using deep learning algorithms. This process took several weeks to avoid introducing artifacts into inherently blurry footage limited by 2012 camera hardware. Once the video was enhanced enough to identify motion blobs, the specialist team began analyzing segments according to the timestamps corresponding to neighbors' statements. At the 12-minute mark, corresponding to approximately 8:07 p.m. on the original clock, a moving shadow appeared near the back door, but its small size and camera angle prevented identification. With deeper algorithmic application and adjusted lighting parameters to highlight contours, the results showed that this shadow had an estimated height consistent with a teenager, highly likely matching Haley's height. This was the first time the video provided evidence suggesting Haley was actually present in the garage area during the period when witnesses heard noises. However, a more significant point emerged about 5 minutes later. At the 17-minute mark of the video, the analysis team recorded a second, larger and heavier movement entering the frame from the right side. The image enhancement and object analysis system indicated that the height, shoulder width, and gait of this second individual matched those of an adult male. Although the camera lacked sufficient clarity to identify a face, the body structure allowed the conclusion that this was not Haley. This became especially critical when compared to Daniel Brooks's original statement. He asserted that he did not enter the garage and did not encounter Haley between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. If the second figure in the video was the only adult male present in the house, as 2012 investigative data recorded, then this figure's appearance directly contradicted Daniel's statement. The analysis team continued cross-referencing the video time with real-world time. By matching lighting patterns and ambient sounds in the video to weather reports and typical neighborhood routines, they determined the camera clock was approximately 9 minutes behind real time. This meant the movement at the 17-minute video mark actually occurred around 8:26 p.m., aligning precisely with the time two witnesses reported seeing the garage light come on. From this, the Cold Case Unit reached a key technical conclusion. The garage light activation was not due to a system malfunction, as initially assumed in the original file, but very likely triggered by the second individual in the video flipping the switch upon entering the garage. Notably, around the 19-minute mark, the video captured both individuals standing in the garage simultaneously, one small, one large, albeit only as shadows in motion. There was no visible violence, but their concurrent presence effectively eliminated the hypothesis that Haley left the house alone. Further analysis over the next 2 minutes showed only one individual leaving the garage toward the backyard. The smaller figure did not reappear after this point. Although the video lacked sufficient sharpness to determine what occurred inside the garage, the disappearance of one figure from the frame while the other continued moving out created a serious contradiction with the original statement. Daniel had claimed he did not enter the garage, did not turn on the light, and did not see Haley that evening. Yet the restored video showed an adult male entering the garage at the exact time witnesses noted unusual lighting. Moreover, the timing of this person's departure from the garage aligned with the period when neighbors reported hearing hurried footsteps. When the analysis team presented the results to the Cold Case Unit, they emphasized that the video did not prove criminal activity, but definitively proved the initial statement by the guardian was inaccurate. This was the first technically robust finding strong enough to reopen questions about the case's severity. The presence of two figures in the garage, combined with the timing of Haley's phone going offline and unexplained gaps in Daniel's timeline led the cold case unit to conclude that the case had been underestimated in 2012 and likely involved external interference overlooked due to technical limitations. These conclusions necessitated a comprehensive re-examination of the file. After the restored video revealed a clear contradiction between Daniel Brooks's statement and the actual movements around the garage on the evening of September 18, 2012, the cold case unit expanded into a technical avenue overlooked in the initial investigation, retrieving data from the engine control module, ECU and passive GPS module of Daniel's Ford Ranger. In 2012, many personal vehicles lacked active navigation systems, but some models still logged basic trip data in the engine management module, including engine start times, average speed, distance traveled, and occasionally raw GPS coordinates if the vehicle had ever connected to a navigation device. Because forensic technology in that era did not commonly employ deep ECU extraction, the original report merely noted the vehicle showed no signs of unusual use. However, with 2020 techniques, the investigative team could retrieve data previously undecodable. The ECU examination was conducted only after the cold case unit completed the required legal process. The newly restored video established probable cause to obtain a vehicle analysis warrant. When the vehicle was brought into the digital forensics lab, technicians removed the ECU module and used specialized data reading equipment to extract the full activity log stored from July to October 2012. Among the records, the most critical was the engine start time on the day Haley disappeared. The ECU showed Daniel's vehicle was started at 8:32 p.m., just minutes after the adult figure in the video exited the garage. This figure immediately created a serious contradiction. Daniel claimed he did not use the vehicle that evening, yet the ECU module recorded the start time with minute-level precision. Further deep analysis revealed approximately 28 minutes of movement data immediately following engine start. Average speed ranged from 25-35 miles per hour, consistent with driving from the Antioch residential area to Long Hunter State Park during low traffic hours. Notably, a series of raw GPS coordinates did not match Daniel's usual daily routes. When cross-referenced with geographic maps, these coordinates led to the northwest area of Long Hunter Park, where there are many small access points and temporary parking areas, some near rarely used trails. One of these GPS coordinates was only a few hundred meters from a previously designated Level 2 search location, but it was an area the initial search team had not approached due to no basis for believing Haley had been there. This prompted the cold case unit to question, why did Daniel's vehicle appear near Long Hunter Park on the very night Haley disappeared, while Daniel claimed he went to bed after 8 p.m.? The ECU data did not stop at the outbound trip. It also recorded the vehicle coming to a complete stop and engine shutdown at 8:57 p.m., with no further movement logs until the next morning. During the roughly 20 minutes the vehicle was stationary, the system continued logging parameters such as engine temperature and fuel status, confirming the engine was not immediately shut off upon arrival, meaning the driver may have exited the vehicle during that interval. This data aligned with the hypothesis that the driver stopped at Long Hunter Park for a brief period unknown to the initial investigation. All metrics were documented in the forensic report by the cold case unit because they formed a logical sequence of activity. Engine start time matched the emergence of the second figure in the video. Travel direction aligned with an area previously expanded in searches but without detected anomalies, and GPS coordinates pointed to a location with complex terrain suitable for discrete nighttime access. Additionally, the team analyzed pedal inputs, RPM and speed variations, determining that throughout the trip the vehicle was driven in a steady manner with no signs of abrupt braking or acceleration. This reinforced the hypothesis that the driver was fully alert and intentional, contrary to Daniel's later suggestion that he went out briefly to look for Haley. When all ECU and GPS data were compiled, the cold case unit created a list of 12 points requiring further forensic cross-verification, including matching GPS coordinates with items recovered in Level 2 searches, assessing the possibility of stops at unsearched areas, and evaluating time consistency across video, ECU, witness statements. Most critically, the positioning data, though raw and discontinuous, was sufficient to construct a new timeline, challenging the entire 2012 account. When compared to the early phase file, the cold case unit concluded that the vehicle's journey on the night of September 18, 2012, was a fact never properly evaluated and very likely a key piece leading to the true sequence of events in the disappearance. The ECU GPS data officially became the first forensic finding with sufficient probative value to redirect the investigation, opening new avenues the original file had never touched. After the ECU and GPS data indicated an anomalous journey by the Ford Ranger on the night Haley disappeared, the cold case unit proceeded with a comprehensive forensic examination of the vehicle, a step not fully possible in 2012 due to lack of legal basis and technical limitation. This time, with an approved search warrant, the vehicle was sealed and transferred to the forensic laboratory for microscopic level inspection. The examination process began with collecting dust and fiber samples from the floor, seats, and trunk. Technicians used specialized adhesive tape and micro-vacuum equipment to gather all particulate matter potentially containing DNA or environmental components. In the driver's compartment, a small amount of fine reddish-brown soil appeared on the floor near the passenger seat, unnoted in the 2012 initial report, and likely overlooked because it was difficult to detect visually. Under ultraviolet light, several very faint stains on the rubber mat became visible, not identifiable to the naked eye, but sufficient to trigger the Kastle-Meyer chemical test for blood traces. Results showed several points with weak positive reactions to hemoglobin, though the samples were too small to be seen without specialized lighting equipment. These points were excised, packaged, and forwarded to the DNA analysis section. In the rear seating area, the forensics team discovered a light blue fiber caught in the plastic groove of a door latch. The color and texture matched two fabric fragments previously found along a trail during Level 2 searches, making this a critical point for comparison. In the trunk, a thin layer of dust showed unusual disturbance, detectable only under laser particle motion illumination. When collected and examined under a microscope, technicians determined this dust layer had mineral composition similar to soil from the northwest forested area of Long Hunter Park, precisely matching the ECU GPS stop coordinates. This increased data consistency, as the trunk soil exhibited the fine lake region soil structure distinct from the mulch in the Brooks' backyard. The next examination phase focused on bodily fluid traces. Technicians applied Blue Star and luminol tests throughout the vehicle interior. Although no large stains appeared, a faint line running along the lower edge of the rear seat reacted mildly to luminol, indicating possible presence of cleaned organic material. This sample was extracted for DNA, but due to its tiny quantity, required STR amplification. After multiple runs, they obtained an incomplete DNA sequence comparable to Haley's reference DNA. The comparison showed partial matching indicators, not conclusive, but sufficient to classify the sample as highly likely belonging to Haley Brooks. The presence of a potential DNA sample on the rear seat, where Daniel claimed no one was transported that night, intensified the contradictions with his statements. Simultaneously, trunk soil was compared to soil recovered during Level 2 searches at Long Hunter Park. Mineralogical reports confirmed high similarity between the two samples in grain size, iron oxide content, and soil matrix structure. Given that the trunk soil could not be explained by routine vehicle use, this became a significant forensic indicator. When re-compared to the two trail fragments, the laboratory determined that the fiber in the vehicle and the two outdoor fragments were the same polyester cotton blend, with matching light blue tone and similar edge fraying. A forensic expert concluded that all three fibers were highly likely to have originated from the same garment, though the specific garment could not be identified without a reference sample. Nevertheless, this evidence aligned with the vehicle's movement path that night and supported the hypothesis that someone inside or near the vehicle had contact with fibers from torn or abraded clothing. During surface examination, the forensics team also detected very faint scratch marks on the trunk lip, directed downward, indicating a heavy object had been placed in or dragged out of the rear compartment. These scratches did not match typical mechanical wear from household transport, but showed angled pulling force, creating an unusual pattern. The technical report noted that while the origin could not be precisely determined, the marks were inconsistent with normal vehicle use. When all examination results were compiled, the cold case unit for the first time possessed a scientific evidence chain linking three elements: ECU GPS data, soil characteristic of Long Hunter Park, and previously recovered items. The partial DNA match to Haley on the rear seat, combined with luminol reactive traces in the vehicle interior, strengthened suspicion that the vehicle transported Haley on the night of September 18, directly contradicting Daniel's statements. In particular, the trunk soil matching the GPS-recorded stop area virtually eliminated the claim that the vehicle was not used that evening. From a forensic perspective, these findings created substantial scientific grounds for suspicion of criminal conduct, not only because the vehicle appeared in an anomalous location, but because organic and material traces inside could only have formed through movement and contact involving the victim or an environment she likely passed through. Upon completion of the report, the cold case unit concluded that the Ford Ranger was not merely tangentially related, but very likely a central element in the sequence of Haley Brooks's disappearance, and for the first time in 8 years of investigation, the file had a sufficiently strong forensic foundation to pivot towards suspicion of foul play. When the forensic results from the provided vehicle provided a strong scientific foundation for suspicions of criminal behavior, the cold case unit moved to the next step, gathering supplemental testimony from witnesses who once lived near the Brooks residence around 2012. The goal of this second round of interviews was not to seek entirely new statements, but to extract details that witnesses previously did not consider important or had not been asked about properly. Having forensic data in hand allowed investigators to ask focused questions and identify matches across timelines. The first witness, Mrs. Jenkins, who lived right next door to the Brooks house, had previously stated that she heard faint arguing sounds sometime after 8 p.m. In the new interview, when prompted to recall the sounds by cross-referencing the timing with the restored garage camera video, she confirmed that the arguing was not continuous but occurred in bursts, like intermittent speech from two people standing not far apart. When pressed about volume, she said the male voice seemed louder, and she believed the sound came from the backyard area rather than inside the house. This detail, previously dismissed as unclear, now became significant because it aligned with the time the video showed two individuals appearing near the garage. The second witness, Mr. Hale, who had reported seeing the garage light come on, was asked for a more detailed description this time. While reviewing the restored video, he acknowledged that after the light turned on, he heard heavy footsteps from the backyard area, something he had not mentioned in 2012 because he thought it was normal neighbor activity. He described the footsteps as like those of an adult, not a teenager. This point matched the forensic data about the two individuals in the garage and strengthened the argument that an adult in the house, or at least a man, was present in that area when the incident occurred. Another witness, Miss Ramirez, who had previously reported seeing a figure moving near the fence, was brought in for an interview under controlled conditions, mimicking the lighting and time of the evening of September 18, 2012. When placed in her original observation position and shown a motion simulation based on the video data, she stated that the figure she saw was not as tall as a man and moved quickly, which fit the hypothesis that the first figure in the video could be Haley. She also added a new detail. She heard something like a car door opening from the direction of the main road a few minutes after the figure disappeared. At the time, she thought it was normal, but when cross-referenced with the ECU data showing the vehicle starting at 8:32, this detail indirectly reinforced the connection between activity in the backyard and vehicle use. Once all supplemental testimony was collected, the cold case unit integrated it with the forensic data and video. The comparison revealed surprising consistency across sources. The arguing sounds heard around 8:07 aligned with minute 12 of the video, when the teenage-sized figure appeared. The garage light turning on at 8:20 matched minute 17, when the adult individual entered the frame. The heavy footsteps described by Mr. Hale corresponded to the movement of the second figure, and the sound resembling a car door around 8:30 aligned with the ECU recording of the vehicle starting. Investigators noted that no testimony directly indicated violent behavior, but all of it suggested the simultaneous presence of two people at the critical time, while ruling out the hypothesis that Haley left the house alone. In particular, the link between testimony about the car door sound and the vehicle's GPS journey created a coherent bridge between pieces of evidence, something the original investigation failed to achieve due to lack of technical data. From this point, the cold case unit concluded that the supplemental testimony, when combined with the video and vehicle forensics, not only reinforced prior points of suspicion, but also formed a more logical temporal structure for the night Haley went missing. Although the exact sequence of events inside the garage could not yet be determined, all available data sources pointed toward a unified narrative. The period from 8 o'clock to 8:30 was far from normal, as Daniel claimed, and instead contained multiple simultaneous anomalies in sound, light, movement, and mechanical activity. Investigators concluded that the supplemental testimony created a new layer of information consistent with forensic findings and strengthened the possibility that the case was not a voluntary disappearance. After completing the collection of supplemental testimony and forensic examination, the cold case unit began reconstructing the full timeline of the night of September 18, 2012. By synthesizing 5 data groups: the restored garage video, GPS data from the Ford Ranger's ECU, forensic samples from the vehicle, neighbor testimony, and Haley's digital footprint. The purpose of this reconstruction was to create a seamless sequence of events, eliminate unsupported speculation, and identify time points that Daniel Brooks could not explain with his original statements. First, the team cross-referenced Haley's activity with her digital footprint. Data showed her last text message was sent before 8 o'clock, and her phone went inactive at 8:17. Precisely during the window when the garage video captured a small figure moving near the back door. The phone going off at this time established that Haley was still within the property boundaries around 8:10 to 8:17. Next, the video showed 2 individuals in the garage, the teenage-sized figure at minute 12 and an adult man at minute 17. At the same time, Mrs. Jenkins' testimony about intermittent arguing and Mr. Hale's about the garage light coming on aligned with the recorded movements. Then, GPS data was compared. The ECU recorded the Ford Ranger starting at 8:32, traveling for nearly 30 minutes to an area northwest of Long Hunter State Park, and stopping at a point matching coordinates where forensic teams later found comparable soil in the truck bed. The stop lasted nearly 20 minutes before the vehicle returned home and shut off at 8:57. When overlaid with the video timeline, the cold case unit noted that the entire vehicle activity sequence began just minutes after the man in the video left the garage, creating a direct link between backyard movement and the vehicle's journey. Meanwhile, Daniel's original statement claimed he was in the house from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock and went to bed early, completely denying entering the garage or using the vehicle. But when compared to the new timeline, the largest gap in his account was from 8:05 to 8:58. The period when the video captured movement, neighbors heard arguing, the garage light came on, the ECU recorded the vehicle starting, GPS tracked an unusual trip, and forensics found park soil in the bed. None of these points were mentioned or explained by Daniel in his 2012 statement. When all data was pieced into a detailed timeline, the cold case unit formed a more consistent sequence. Around 8:05, 8:10, Haley appeared near the back door, matching video and sounds one witness heard. Around 8:15, 8:20, neighbors heard arguing, and the garage light came on, aligning with the adult figure's appearance in the video. Around 8:26. Garage movement showed both individuals in the confined space, after which the smaller figure no longer appeared. At 8:32, the Ford Ranger left the house toward Long Hunter Park. Around 8:52, the vehicle stopped in a secluded wooded area northwest of the park. At 8:57, it returned home and shut off. No digital footprint activity from Haley occurred after 8:17, and no witness saw her leave the area on foot. This timeline exposed numerous behavioral gaps in Daniel's account that could not be reasonably explained. His claim of not hearing arguing while neighbors did, his denial of turning on the garage light despite video confirmation, his denial of vehicle use despite ECU records and forensic soil evidence from the park, his assertion that he didn't see Haley that evening, while video showed a similarly sized teenager with an adult in the garage. All these points were consolidated into a complete timeline report, a detailed, seamless description of events from 8 o'clock to 9 p.m. on September 18, 2012, grounded in physical evidence rather than subjective statements. Upon completion, the cold case unit concluded that the new timeline not only refuted the hypothesis of Haley leaving voluntarily, but also highlighted the inexplicable presence of an adult man in the garage, contradicting the sole account from the person living with the victim. From an analytical perspective, Daniel's behavioral voids became central to the case file, as they covered the entire chain of events leading to Haley's disappearance from all traces. As the timeline was reconstructed and Daniel Brooks's behavioral gaps became increasingly apparent, the cold case unit recognized the need to re-examine all electronic evidence once belonging to Haley to cross-reference it with the newly discovered forensic and video data. In the Phase 1 file, Haley's phone was recorded as seized and returned to the family after being deemed no longer exploitable in 2012. However, the handover report at the time did not detail the process nor list accompanying accessories such as cases, spare SIM cards, or chargers, an irregularity since standard procedure requires full documentation when evidence is returned. The cold case unit decided to approach the family to recover the device again, aiming to verify whether the phone had truly been fully analyzed or if any evidence had been overlooked or concealed during initial handling. When investigators arrived at Daniel's house, they requested to check the personal storage box where the family said they kept Haley's belongings. Daniel retrieved a small plastic box containing a few mementos, hair ties, a notebook, a bracelet, and an old phone purported to be Haley's. However, upon immediate external inspection, the technician noticed this was not the device entered into the 2012 record. The serial number, case color, and model did not match. Daniel explained that the phone might have had its case replaced earlier, or he didn't remember which one it was, but his vagueness, at a time when forensic conclusions were focusing on concealment behavior, immediately flagged this as suspicious to the cold case unit. Investigators requested to check additional personal items of Haley's, including her school backpack, a small wooden box in her room, and the closet. In the bottom drawer of the closet, they found a small fabric pouch not listed in the 2012 property seizure inventory. Inside was a second electronic device, an older iPhone matching the model in the original report. The phone was completely powered off, uncharged, and showed no signs of use for years. More importantly, the back had a long crack, not documented in the 2012 report. This was the first indication that Haley's phone may not have been handed over properly and could have been deliberately withheld from initial analysis. When compared to archived 2012 photos, the cold case unit confirmed the device found in Daniel's storage box was Haley's original phone, and the one Daniel first presented was an unrelated device. This raised a critical question: why was the original phone set aside and not presented when police came to recover evidence for the new investigation? Daniel said he thought the other one was the last phone Haley used. But this explanation became even more inconsistent, given that he had personally received the device back from police in 2012. Investigators noted that the emergence of concealed evidence, whether intentional or not, in the context of mounting suspicion around Daniel's behavior, became strong grounds to expand forensic analysis. When Haley's actual phone was taken to the lab, technicians observed that the device had lost all activity history after 8/17, consistent with prior digital footprint data, but surprisingly showed signs of hardware tampering. Some internal screws were scratched, and the circuit board had a crude resoldered spot, indicating the device may have been opened after seizure or after return to the family. This was completely contrary to standard procedure. Police never open a device without a full warrant, and the family had no reason to disassemble their missing daughter's phone. Additionally, the SIM tray was empty, while the old report confirmed Haley's SIM was still in the phone. When asked about the missing SIM, Daniel said he didn't remember touching the SIM and didn't think the SIM was important. However, in missing person investigations, the SIM is a key element for tracing communications, and its disappearance made the story even more anomalous. Based on the rapidly escalating level of suspicion, the cold case unit decided to submit the phone for advanced forensic analysis, including recovery of deleted data, extraction of volatile memory, and examination of physical tampering signs. Although the phone was too old for optimal modern recovery techniques, the forensic team still hoped to uncover final activity timestamps or hidden data in non-volatile memory, information inaccessible to the 2012 investigation. The discovery of the hidden phone, combined with hardware tampering evidence and Daniel's provision of the wrong device during the initial recovery attempt, led the cold case unit to formally note that relevant evidence was not properly preserved or presented, with a possibility it was intentionally separated from the original investigative process. Although criminal conduct could not yet be concluded, the existence of concealed evidence inside the only home where someone had contact with the victim on the evening of September 18, 2012, created a legal and operational foundation to continue deepening forensic analysis and further aligning Daniel's behavior with the newly reconstructed timeline. When Haley's actual phone was transferred to the lab for advanced forensic analysis, the team of specialists focused on extracting residual data from the memory, including image files, audio files, and hypertext data that had previously been deemed irrecoverable in 2012. Thanks to new NAND chip reading technology, the device was able to access memory partitions that the initial investigation could not reach. Although many files had been overwritten over time, several discrete fragments were sufficient to reconstruct the most critical media files. Focusing on the photo storage partition, the forensic team discovered a sequence of 5 corrupted frames, all bearing timestamps from the afternoon and evening of September 18. 4 of them were ordinary photos, 1 of homework, 1 of the house cat, and 2 of the bedroom window at sunset. However, the 5th file, with a timestamp of 8/12, stood out because the image was noisy, but still recognizable as the silhouette of a person standing in front of the back door. After processing with image reconstruction algorithms, the specialist determined this was a low-light shot, likely triggered accidentally by Haley while holding the phone. The posture of the person in the image, slightly bent forward and leaning, matched the direction of movement captured in the garage video. Moreover, the background showed light from the garage that had just turned on, creating a faint strip of illumination in the distance, consistent with the neighbor's statement. This was the first evidence indicating that Haley was still holding the phone and standing in the backyard at the critical time. More significant than the photos were the audio files. In the audio storage partition, the forensic team found a short 11-second recording in the cache folder of the default voice recorder app. The file's timestamp was 8/13, just minutes before the phone lost connection at 8/17. The original recording was heavily distorted and nearly inaudible. After filtering background frequencies and reconstructing amplitude, the specialists clarified 2 overlapping audio layers. The first layer consisted of rapid breathing and light footsteps, very similar to the movement of a young person moving quickly toward the backyard. The second layer, more attention-grabbing, was a male voice coming from a medium distance. The words were unclear, but the volume and reverb indicated the person was standing in a semi-open space, possibly near the garage door. Based on frequency indicators, The specialists concluded that the voice had characteristics of an adult male, not a teenager or a voice echoing from a neighbor's house. This aligned with the movement of the adult male figure in the recovered video. The speech was not clear enough to identify content, but there was a prolonged syllable resembling a shout, matching Mrs. Jenkins' description of intermittent arguing sounds. The fact that the recording existed in the cache folder indicated it was not a deliberate recording, but most likely created when the phone accidentally activated the microphone, an occurrence common when an app is opened in a pocket or when the device is gripped tightly during movement. Combining the rapid breathing, light footsteps, and nearby male voice, investigators assessed that the audio file was particularly valuable. It proved Haley was not stationary in her room before 8:17, as previously assumed, but was moving in the backyard while sharing acoustic space with a man. Another finding from the audio file was a sharp noise at the end of the recording, a short sound resembling an impact between a hard object and a metal surface. The specialists compared the frequency to standard garage door switch sounds and determined it matched the sound of a hand contacting metal near the door, consistent with the possibility that the phone was dropped or struck something when Haley suddenly changed direction. This corresponded to the device losing connection just minutes later, possibly due to a hard fall or abrupt power off. Additionally, the forensic team recovered an EXIF data fragment from the fifth photo, containing information about how the phone was held. Accelerometer data showed the device was sharply tilted to the left just before the photo was saved. This was a sign that Haley had quickly changed posture, possibly reacting to someone's action or appearance. When combining all the photo and audio data with the reconstructed timeline, the cold case unit concluded that these media files not only filled the time gap between 8:10 and 8:17, but also confirmed the concurrence of three factors. Haley was in the backyard, a man was nearby, and the surrounding environment contained anomalous signals. Thus, the data from the phone, previously rated as not useful in 2012, has now become a pivotal piece, directly linking the victim to the scene and the man appearing in the video. The cold case unit concluded that these recovered photo and audio files constitute the most important evidence in Haley's electronic record, with sufficient legal and forensic value to clearly guide the next phase of the investigation. After recovering the photo and audio data from Haley's device, the cold case unit refocused on the garage video, this time with the goal of analyzing movement using machine learning models to more clearly identify the two individuals in the footage. The video originally had low resolution and heavy noise, making frame-by-frame identification by eye nearly impossible. Handlers, with the support of a deep learning model specialized in human pose, relative height, and body proportions, the team was able to reconstruct movement in 3D block form, thereby increasing accuracy in determining gender, age, and differences between the two subjects. Initially, the technical team loaded the entire 45-minute recovered video into an improved version of the PoseNet analysis model, which allowed detection of body key points even in very blurry images. Preliminary results showed that the first individual, appearing from approximately minute 12 to minute 16, had an estimated height of 160 centimeters, slender build, narrow shoulders, and quick movement, consistent with the physical characteristics of a 16-year-old female like Haley. The model also noted a characteristic knee bounce during fast walking, a gait typical of young people and rarely seen in adults. When compared with archived photos and Haley's biological measurements, the specialists concluded that the probability the first individual was Haley exceeded 85%, a figure strong enough to include in the forensic report. For the second individual, appearing at minute 17, the machine learning model produced entirely different results: estimated height of 182 centimeters, broad shoulders, large upper body, long and heavy strides. The gait showed a slight rightward lean, consistent with descriptions of Daniel's walk in medical records. However, the model could not confirm identity, only classifying the second individual as belonging to the adult male group, with body features more compatible with Daniel Brooks than anyone else in the area at the time. After separating the movements of the two individuals, the analysis team focused on the most critical segment, the moment both figures appeared simultaneously in the garage. By enhancing motion contrast and reconstructing outlines using skeleton models, they determined that the smaller individual was standing near the back door, while the larger one was near the light switch. When simulated lighting was projected onto the frame, the specialists observed reflections on the metal surface of the garage door that matched the exact moment the light turned on, meaning the larger individual had physically touched that area, not triggered by a motion sensor. This was a crucial point because it completely ruled out the possibility of a technical malfunction causing the light to turn on, as assumed in the 2012 investigation. More importantly, the motion analysis model showed the distance between the two individuals changing rapidly within the next 3 seconds. The teenage figure stepped back, while the adult figure advanced 1 step. This aligned significantly with the rapid breathing and light footsteps in Haley's audio recording, indicating she was retreating or evading. When running a combined simulation of the video and audio data, the model determined that the smaller individual's movement speed increased slightly at the moment the rapid breathing appeared, meaning Haley was likely in a state of stress or surprise. The model also detected a sudden arm movement by the larger individual, though the resolution was insufficient to identify the specific action. However, when cross-referenced with forensic results from the back seat, where partial matching DNA to Haley was found, the technical team assessed that some form of physical contact likely occurred between the two, though the nature of the impact could not yet be determined. Another analysis focused on the smaller individual's gaze direction. The model reconstructed the head tilt angle in the video, showing Haley looking to the right, toward the light switch location, right as the light came on. This simultaneously matched the recovered phone photo, where garage light created a horizontal strip across the background, proving Haley was in the yard or near the back door at the same moment the light activated. All these elements reinforced the hypothesis that Haley had moved toward the garage and was present in that space when the larger individual appeared. To verify consistency, the specialists continued running the motion analysis model on the smaller individual's speed after the larger one entered the garage. Results showed the smaller individual's disappearance from the frame occurred very quickly. Only about 1.2 seconds after the adult advanced, and the model recorded no movement exiting the garage in the direction captured by the camera. This led investigators to rule out the possibility that Haley actively fled the garage space in the recorded direction, because if she had run out, the camera would have captured lateral or receding motion. Instead, the model suggested she left the field of view in a direction obscured by the adult's body or was pulled out of frame. These conclusions aligned with the reconstructed timeline. After the moment the two individuals appeared together, GPS recorded the vehicle leaving the house just minutes later. When merging motion analysis, video, audio data, and forensics, the cold case unit concluded that the likelihood Haley was in the garage on the night of September 18th was very high. And the appearance of the second individual, with features matching Daniel, indicated the two had direct interaction right before she vanished from all traces. The machine learning model thus provided the strongest layer of evidence to support the hypothesis that Haley's disappearance was not a spontaneous runaway, but occurred in the context of another person's presence and influence directly within the garage space. After the machine learning motion analysis strongly reinforced the hypothesis that Haley was in the garage with an adult male at the critical moment, the cold case unit forwarded the entire report to the prosecutor's office for reassessment of the case nature. The new evidence, including the recovered video, ECU GPS data, DNA traces in the vehicle, matching soil in the trunk, the audio file, capturing a male voice and rapid breathing, as well as supplemental witness statements, exceeded the scope of an ordinary missing person case. After nearly 8 years on ice, Haley Brooks's file was officially reclassified under the standard of a potential criminal case. The The prosecutor assigned to cold cases reviewed all materials and concluded that the circumstantial evidence had reached the level of reasonable grounds to upgrade the investigation from missing juvenile to suspicious disappearance and subsequently to homicide investigation, a probe into an undetermined death with suspicion of human causation. This was a major legal shift, paving the way for deeper search warrants, additional evidence seizures, and suspect interviews with expanded authority. In the approval report, the prosecutor highlighted 3 core points compelling the file to be reopened as a criminal case. 1. The inexplicable presence of 2 individuals in the garage at the exact time Haley disappeared, completely contradicting Daniel's 2012 statement. 2. GPS data proving the vehicle left the house at 8:32 and traveled to Long Hunter Park, an area previously searched but not in full, indicating the possibility that a body or evidence was once taken there. 3. Forensic traces in the vehicle directly linked to the victim, including partial matching DNA, characteristic geological soil, and fabric fibers, consistent with off-scene evidence. From a legal perspective, this evidence was no longer in the realm of hypothesis, but sufficiently connected to regard Daniel Brooks as the central suspect in the case. The old file had recorded Daniel as the last known person to have contact with Haley. But now, with the new data, that designation shifted to the last person seen with supporting physical evidence. The Cold Case Unit therefore submitted a new list of investigative powers, including obtaining a warrant to search the entire Brooks residence, seizing other electronic devices that might contain data, examining garage surfaces with luminol, retrieving Daniel's financial records around the time of the incident, and re-interviewing him as a suspect. The prosecutor approved all proposals and signed the official decision to reopen Haley Brooks's case as a criminal investigation. The objectives of the new phase were clearly established in the directive. First, determine the cause of Haley's death, even though the body has not been found. Second, identify the location where the body may have been taken or concealed. Third, fully reconstruct the sequence of events in the garage from 8:05 to 8:30 p.m. And fourth, assess the degree of involvement and criminal responsibility of Daniel Brooks. The Cold Case Unit also determined that, to clarify the cause of death, they needed access to areas of Long Hunter Park that the initial search team had never fully covered due to lack of basis. The northwest forested area, matching the coordinates where the vehicle stopped according to the ECU, was added to the list of critical points to be exploited. In addition, the prosecutor directed that any search for the body or remaining evidence must use a multi-layered approach, combining geological analysis, ground-penetrating radar, examination of disturbed vegetation samples, and assessment of terrain changes over time. Finally, Daniel Brooks being officially designated the central suspect allowed the Cold Case Unit to apply new interrogation procedures with a higher level of compulsion. This marked a major shift in the entire case. Instead of focusing on the possibility that Haley had run away, the investigation now centered on determining what happened to her in the garage, why the vehicle was used contrary to the statement, and how the body or physical evidence may have been removed from the scene. With the decision to reopen the case, Haley Brooks's investigation entered a decisive phase, where the goal was no longer to understand where the victim went, but to clarify what really happened to her on the night of September 18, 2012, and what evidence could lead to the location of her body. When the case file was reopened as a criminal investigation and Daniel Brooks was identified as the central suspect, the Cold Case Unit conducted a formal interrogation with the objective of testing the consistency of his statements against the full body of newly collected forensic and technical evidence. The interrogation took place in a standard recording room, with 2 investigators and a representative from the district attorney's office present to ensure every development was fully documented for legal evaluation. At the start of the session, the investigator reviewed the content of Daniel's 2012 statement. He claimed to have been inside the house from around 7:45 p.m., did not enter the garage that evening, did not hear any arguing, did not see Haley leave the house, and did not use any vehicle at any point that night. Daniel nodded to confirm that those details were still true, emphasizing that his memory had not changed at all. When asked if there was any possibility he might have misremembered a detail, Daniel rebutted, "No, I'm certain about what I said." At this point, the investigator began presenting the chain of contradictory evidence. First was the recovered garage video. They showed Daniel a slow-motion playback at 8:26 p.m., depicting an adult male entering the garage, turning on the light, and moving toward the rear door. Daniel watched in silence, then stated that the image was too blurry to conclude who it is. The investigator asked him to explain why the body proportions in the video, shoulder width, height, and gait, including the slight outward tilt of the right foot, a feature previously noted in his medical records, matched his own. Daniel responded by waving his hand dismissively, claiming the AI model can be wrong, and that it could be a neighbor. The investigator pointed out that no one else had a garage key, and that the video captured motion only within a space under his control. When asked if he had entered the garage, even for a few minutes, Daniel's tone began to shift. He said, "Maybe I went down to check something," then immediately retracted, "No, I remember I didn't go in." This wavering was noted by the investigators as a sign of inconsistency. Next, the investigator presented GPS data from the Ford Ranger's ECU, showing the vehicle was started at 8:32 p.m. and traveled to an area northwest of Long Hunter Park before returning at 8:57 p.m. Daniel appeared visibly confused, repeatedly insisting the truck never left the house. When the investigator explained that the ECU is an independent module that cannot be user-modified and that its activity log perfectly matched the time a witness reported hearing unusual noises, Daniel paused in silence for several seconds before offering a new explanation. Maybe the system malfunctioned, the truck had issues before. The investigator immediately countered that technical inspection results showed no system faults, and soil traces in the trunk exactly matched soil samples from the GPS-recorded coordinates. At this stage, Daniel could no longer maintain a calm tone and became defensive. "I don't know where that dirt came from. I don't remember driving that night." When asked if anyone else could have driven his vehicle, Daniel answered firmly, "No, no one else has the keys." This made the contradiction even starker. If only he could use the truck. Yet the truck left the house at the exact time Haley disappeared. No explanation remained consistent with his claim that he didn't drive. The investigator then moved to data from Haley's phone, an item hidden in Daniel's house and only recovered when the cold case unit searched all stored belongings. They asked why he had handed them a different phone, not the one listed in the 2012 inventory. Daniel replied that he got it wrong, but investigators independently confirmed he had reclaimed the original phone in the year of the incident. When questioned about why Haley's phone showed signs of hardware tampering and why the SIM card was missing, Daniel said he didn't remember, then shifted to suggesting maybe someone in the house touched it. The investigator reminded him that Haley was the only other person living in the house, and tampering with a missing person's device is highly suspicious. Next, the investigator presented the 11-second recovered audio file containing Haley's rapid breathing, light footsteps, and the voice of an adult male. When asked if he recognized the voice, Daniel evaded, it could be the TV. The investigator pointed out that the TV in his house was located in the living room, separated from the rear door by 2 walls, and could not produce sound at that volume or proximity. At this point, Daniel's demeanor changed. He began responding vaguely, repeatedly saying he was not sure, didn't remember, or couldn't confirm. This marked a distinct behavioral shift from the absolute confidence in his initial statement. To assess whether he was deliberately distorting the timeline, the investigator asked Daniel to recount the events of the evening of September 18th in the most detailed way possible, from arriving home to going to bed. Daniel described a timeline very similar to his 2012 statement, but interspersed with new ambiguities and contradictions, such as possibly going to the kitchen around 8:15 p.m. or being not sure if he heard noises in the backyard. This vagueness was noted as a clear change in how he described events, contradicting his earlier assertion that his memory had not changed. When the investigator emphasized that all evidence pointed to his presence in the garage and his driving the vehicle away from the house, Daniel displayed tension, clenching both hands, avoiding eye contact, and shifting to absolute denial. "I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened to Haley." The investigators recorded that his reactions, oscillating between strong denial, vague explanations, and evasion, fit the pattern of behavior seen when a suspect is confronted with directly contradictory evidence. The interrogation concluded with the investigator's official note: Daniel's statements could no longer be considered reliable. He had altered his timeline presentation, could not explain the forensic and GPS data, and showed signs of concealing electronic evidence. This marked a turning point in the case, positioning Daniel not only as the last person to have contact with Haley, but as someone unable to offer any reasonable explanation for the chain of events leading to her disappearance. Following the first interrogation, in which Daniel Brooks exhibited clear wavering and could not explain most of the evidence contradicting his prior statements, the cold case unit continued completing the remaining forensic analyses before conducting a second interrogation. This time, the goal was not only to test consistency in Daniel's statements, but also to directly evaluate the likelihood of his involvement in the sequence of events leading to Haley's disappearance. The second interrogation was scheduled after the labs returned a new series of results. Soil in the trunk matched perfectly with geological samples from the area where Daniel's vehicle stopped, according to GPS data. Fiber analysis using spectrometry confirmed that fragments recovered from the vehicle and pieces found near the trail in 2012 originated from the same garment type. An advanced DNA analysis revealed a trace sample on the rear seat edge with rare genetic markers consistent with Haley's profile, previously undetectable due to equipment sensitivity limitations. These findings created a far tighter forensic network than in the first session. When Daniel entered the room, the atmosphere was noticeably more tense. He tried to appear calm, but wariness was evident in every small gesture. The investigators began by presenting the soil analysis results. The screen displayed side-by-side images comparing trunk soil with soil collected at the GPS coordinates where the vehicle stopped on the night of September 18th. Mineral structure, grain size, clay content, and iron oxide ratios matched almost perfectly, something the geologist described as impossible to be coincidental. When asked to explain why the trunk contained soil characteristic of Long Hunter Park, while he had denied driving there, Daniel grew impatient, repeating that someone else could have used the truck, but unable to name anyone or provide a plausible scenario. The investigators reminded him that he had repeatedly confirmed no one else had the keys. Faced with this new contradiction, Daniel fell into a prolonged silence, a signal recorded as avoidance rather than mere confusion. Next, the investigators moved to the fiber evidence. They placed enlarged images of 3 samples in front of Daniel: one fiber from the rear door plastic channel of the vehicle, one recovered during the 2012 secondary search, and one reference sample from spectrometry testing. The forensic report confirmed a high probability that all 3 originated from the same garment type. The investigators asked whether Daniel recognized any similar clothing Haley had worn. Daniel answered vaguely that she had a lot of blue shirts, but when specifically asked about the t-shirt Haley was wearing on the day she disappeared, he said he didn't remember. This contrasted sharply with his 2012 statement, in which he described her clothing in detail. The investigators noted this change as an apparent deliberate avoidance of references to the victim's attire, a critical point because the fiber match confirmed that Haley's clothing had either directly contacted the vehicle on the night she vanished, or was placed there during evidence concealment. When Daniel continued to insist he knew nothing about the fibers, the investigators turned to the strongest evidence, DNA. The new test results, using higher sensitivity amplification technology, confirmed that the trace DNA on the rear seat carried rare genetic markers matching Haley's profile. The investigators explained that this DNA could not have been deposited if Haley had merely sat in the vehicle months earlier. The location and degradation state indicated recent organic contact close to the time of disappearance. When asked why Haley's DNA would appear on the rear seat when he claimed he never transported her anywhere, Daniel replied in a low voice, "I don't know. Maybe from before." The investigators immediately pointed out that in 2012, he had stated Haley rarely sat in the back seat, creating yet another layer of contradiction. Cornered, Daniel began altering parts of his story. He suggested Haley might have gotten into the truck that night without my knowledge, or maybe she took something from the vehicle. The investigators asked him to describe the specific circumstances under which Haley could have entered the truck in his absence. But Daniel did not answer directly, only repeating that he didn't remember that night clearly. The interrogation shifted to cross-referencing the vehicle's journey with imaging data. The investigators reviewed the timeline again. Garage video captured movement of two individuals at 8:26 p.m. Haley's audio file contained rapid breathing and a nearby male voice. GPS showed the vehicle leaving the house at 8:32 p.m. Haley's DNA was present on the rear seat. Fibers from her clothing were found in the vehicle. When asked if he could offer any reasonable explanation for this combination of facts, Daniel remained silent, hands clenched in a defensive posture. The investigators noted signs of stress, increased breathing rate, and avoidance of eye contact, common reactions when a suspect faces direct evidence confrontation. Daniel attempted another defense. Maybe someone broke in. I don't know. Maybe something happened I didn't see. The investigators immediately rejected this because there were no signs of forced entry. The camera recorded only two individuals, and no data supported the presence of a third party. The shift from outright denial to unrealistic hypotheticals indicated the crumbling of Daniel's account. At the close of the session, the investigators asked directly, "What responsibility do you have in Haley Brooks' disappearance?" Daniel refused to answer, invoking his legal rights. This was the first time he exercised his right to remain silent during the entire investigation process, and it was recorded as an indicator that he could no longer produce statements reconcilable with the evidence. The session report concluded, Daniel Brooks could not explain any of the forensic findings, his statements changed repeatedly, and the explanations he offered conflicted with physical evidence. The cold case unit assessed his direct involvement in Haley's disappearance as very high, and the second interrogation strengthened the grounds for advancing the case to the next phase of action. After the second interrogation, when the entire chain of forensic evidence, from DNA, soil, fibers, GPS data, recovered video, to audio from the phone, was presented in an undeniable manner, Daniel Brooks left the interrogation room in clear emotional collapse. The layers of defense he had maintained for 8 years had been systematically dismantled, and the cold case unit observed a sharp decline in his psychological resistance. In the following 48 hours, after consulting with prosecutors, the investigators decided to conduct a brief supplemental interrogation, not confrontational, but aimed at persuading the suspect to provide the missing piece in the timeline. They understood that to complete the case file, they needed the single most critical element every homicide lacks without it: the location of Haley Brooks' body. The third interrogation began with a calmer approach from the investigators. Instead of introducing more evidence, they focused on explaining the legal consequences of continuing to conceal the body, stressing that Daniel's level of cooperation could directly influence how the justice system evaluated his conduct. Daniel entered the room with tired eyes and avoided eye contact, a stark contrast to the firmness he had shown in earlier sessions. When asked if he wanted to correct anything that isn't completely accurate in his previous statements, Daniel remained silent longer than usual. Finally, he sighed, clasped his hands together, and spoke the first words signaling psychological collapse. "I didn't think things would go this far." The investigators did not interrupt. They let Daniel continue, noting every subtle change in tone. He went on, "I didn't mean to. I didn't want it to happen. It's not like what you're thinking." When asked specifically what happened, Daniel began describing a sequence of events he had never acknowledged in 8 years. He said that on the evening of September 18th, Haley had stormed out to the backyard in anger, and he followed because he wanted to talk. But everything happened too fast. He stated that in the garage, as Haley stepped backward and he moved closer, she slipped and fell against the edge of the tool bench. When asked why he did not call for emergency help, Daniel did not answer immediately. He swallowed hard, then said, "I thought she was just unconscious, but when I checked, I panicked." This was the first time he implied Haley may have died that evening. The investigators asked him to clarify whether the fall was the cause of death. Daniel admitted, "I don't know, I'm not sure, but she wasn't breathing." Sensing Daniel was on the verge of disclosing more, the investigators moved to the central question, "What did you do after realizing Haley was unresponsive?" Daniel bowed his head, covered his face with both hands, and said in a choked voice, "I was afraid people would think I did something worse. I was afraid of losing everything. I didn't know what else to do, except take her away from there." When asked where, Daniel fell silent, gripped his hands tighter, then spoke so softly it was barely audible. "Long Hunter, that dirt area near the Northern Trail." The investigators asked him to describe the exact location. Daniel said he drove to a small unmarked turnoff, continued a few hundred meters, and stopped at an open dirt area roughly 15–20 meters wide. He said he left her there after covering her with leaves and soil. When asked why he chose that spot, Daniel replied it was the only place that came to mind at the time, and he had visited the area several times before to fish. When the investigators asked him to describe the area's conditions, terrain, landmarks, distance to the trail, Daniel began providing highly specific details: a large twisted tree trunk, a flat moss-covered rock, and a narrow path leading toward the water's edge, but stopping short of the lake. These details prompted urgent notations from the investigators, because they aligned with prior GIS analysis conducted by the cold case unit based on ECU GPS coordinates. Continuing the questioning, the investigators asked why Daniel did not report to police if it truly was an accident. In desperation, Daniel said, "She was out of control, who would believe me? And I thought, if I had time, I could figure out how to explain it." This statement, though riddled with contradictions, showed Daniel had clearly recognized the gravity of the situation beyond what he had previously admitted. The investigators requested confirmation of the body's location. This time Daniel did not evade, "That place where I took her. It's still there, I never went back." When asked whether the body had been moved or affected by environmental factors, he replied that he was not sure, but covered it with dirt and leaves very quickly. They also inquired about the body's condition when he left the area. Daniel said, "She wasn't breathing, no neck response, but there wasn't blood." This detail drew attention from the team because it did not fully align with certain forensic data, but opened the possibility of determining cause of death once the body was located. As the interrogation neared its end, the investigators asked Daniel to mark the precise location on a topographic map. Daniel tried to avoid looking directly at the map, but after several minutes of silence, he placed his finger on an area near the intersection of two unmarked minor trails on the 2012 park map. It was the dense wooded region northwest, precisely where the ECU recorded the vehicle stopping for nearly 20 minutes. When asked one final time whether he was certain this was where he left Haley's body, Daniel said, "If it's still there, it will be in that area. I remember that twisted tree and the rock." The interrogation concluded with the most significant finding of the entire cold case process. The suspect had provided the body's location, vague in parts, but specific enough to deploy a specialized excavation team. The district attorney immediately approved a comprehensive search warrant for Long Hunter State Park, focusing on the area Daniel described and the region corresponding to the GPS data. The cold case unit assessed that the details Daniel provided, from terrain description to the timing of the vehicle stop, matched scientific data to a significant degree, reinforcing the conclusion that this area was highly likely to contain the body. This became the basis for launching the targeted search phase, the step that could definitively establish the nature of the case and transform Daniel's statements into guiding evidence for a decisive excavation. Right after Daniel Brooks pinpointed the location where he said he had left Haley's body, the cold case unit coordinated with the crime scene forensics team, the police department's search unit, and the Tennessee State Parks Office to launch an emergency exhumation plan at Long Hunter State Park. Since the suspected area was in a dense, rarely visited forested region, access required building a temporary path, determining GPS coordinates from the ECU data and Daniel's description, then delineating a roughly 40-meter radius around the marked point. To avoid disturbing the natural scene, the forensics team used ground-penetrating radar to detect subsurface anomalies such as voids, unusually compacted soil layers, or signs of manual digging and refilling. The scan revealed a strong reflection point at a depth of 40-60 centimeters, near a large tree, with a twisted shape as Daniel had described. This became the priority excavation site. Excavation began by clearing leaf litter and dry branches, using small shovels, soft brushes, and specialized soil trowels to prevent damage to evidence. Within just a few minutes, the upper soil layer showed unusual structure, non-uniform with the natural stratigraphy, mixed with signs of being turned over and then compacted. The forensics team continued removing thin layers of soil, and at about half a meter deep, the first fragment of human bone appeared, a partially decomposed tibia section, surrounded by dry leaves and compacted earth. The area was immediately flagged, and bone recovery protocols were initiated. As excavation continued, they uncovered a portion of pelvis, a jawbone with several intact teeth, and numerous smaller bone fragments scattered unevenly, indicating the body had been subjected to natural processes over a long period. In addition to the bones, investigators recovered two nearly identifiable items, a light blue hair tie and a piece of polyester cotton blend fabric, matching in color and material the fabric samples collected from the vehicle and search area in 2012. They also found a small metal hoop earring still clinging to some soil. When cross-referenced with Haley's personal records, this accessory matched the style of earrings she commonly wore. After collecting all bone fragments and items, the forensics team immediately photographed, measured, and mapped the distribution to reconstruct the body's original position. Initial evidence suggested the body had been placed on its side, with no signs of binding, but covered with soil and leaves in a manual fashion, not the result of natural landslide. All bone samples were sealed according to protocol and transported to the lab for identification and cause of death determination. In the laboratory, analysis began with measuring bone length, assessing development and tissue structure to determine the individual's age. The results aligned with age 16, reinforcing the likelihood that this was Haley's body. Next came dental comparison. Haley's dental records were retrieved from a local clinic, including arch shape and notable features, such as a slightly chipped front tooth from 2010. When compared to the recovered jawbone, the matches were complete. This constituted the second strongest piece of identification evidence. Finally, the forensics team conducted DNA analysis by extracting samples from viable bone tissue and comparing them to Haley's mother's DNA sample. The match ratio reached 99.998%, meeting legal standards, to confirm that the exhumed remains were indeed Haley Brooks. Concurrently with identification, the forensics team examined bone trauma to assess pre-mortem injury possibilities. A fracture on the left temporal bone was noted, consistent with a heavy impact from the edge of a tool bench as Daniel had described, though advanced decomposition prevented full determination of timing and force. No evidence was found of dismemberment, binding, or intentional scattering. Fragmentation was primarily due to animal activity and natural environmental factors over time. Nevertheless, the deliberate placement of the body in a shallow pit and hasty covering with soil was sufficient to constitute concealment, completely ruling out the possibility of an unreported accident. Upon completion of the forensic report, the prosecutor concluded that the recovered body was positively Haley Brooks, and the excavation site matched both the suspect's statement and the vehicle's GPS data. The remaining physical evidence, fabric fragment, hair tie, earring, all reinforced a direct connection between the body and the crime scene. The briefing of results to the cold case unit was regarded as a turning point. After 8 years, the search for the victim had finally concluded, and the recovered remains became the central evidence for the next phase of legal proceedings. The final forensic report was compiled after weeks of bone tissue analysis, trauma structure evaluation, environmental data review, and statement cross-referencing to precisely determine the cause of Haley Brooks's death. The body's recovery, after more than 8 years of decomposition, presented significant limitations, yet forensic experts still gathered enough key indicators to reconstruct the mechanism of death according to scientific standards and support prosecution. Beginning with the skull, examiners identified a distinct fracture in the left temporal region, extending nearly 4.2 centimeters, with sharp fracture edges and no signs of bone remodeling, indicating the injury occurred close to the time of death. The injury pattern was consistent with a forceful impact against a hard, angular object, not overly sharp, but sufficient to cause traumatic brain injury. When compared to the garage inspection report and Daniel's final statement, describing Haley slipping and falling into the edge of the tool bench, experts assessed the fracture mechanism as fully compatible with the metal bench edge documented in 2012 scene photos. No evidence of cutting, stabbing, or sharp force trauma was found. No long bone fractures suggested additional major force beyond the head impact. This supported the hypothesis that the cranial trauma was the primary cause of death, or at least caused deep unconsciousness, eliminating protective airway reflexes. Forensic experts paid particular attention to the depressed fracture segment, proving directional force rather than impact against soft ground or padding. Another notable finding was evidence of intracranial hemorrhage, identified through tissue remnants and characteristic mineral staining from blood decomposition. Although prolonged time degraded samples, trace chemical analysis detected concentrated iron from hemoglobin at the injury site, a strong indicator that the traumatic brain injury occurred while the victim was alive, not post-mortem during body movement. Moving to the neck and chest, no fractures indicative of strangulation or external compression were found, making mechanical asphyxiation less supported. However, analysis of soil and leaf debris adhering to the facial skull region suggested the victim had fallen face down onto soil before being covered. And if unconscious, airway contact with soil could have caused secondary suffocation. Traces of soil in the nasal and oral cavities, though not fully soft tissue analyzable, remained indirect evidence. This aligned with Daniel's description that he didn't see the girl breathing after the fall, as well as the phone audio recording, where rapid breathing sounds and retreating footsteps indicated a sudden high-stress situation just before disconnection. In the forensic comparison section, the report stated clearly that the severity of cranial injury was sufficient to cause death absent medical intervention. Experts concluded Haley was likely rendered unconscious immediately and placed in life-threatening condition. Simultaneously, the lack of timely medical aid, combined with potential airway occlusion by soil, resulted in death within minutes. The report stressed that while no direct evidence confirmed violent acts by Daniel, no repetitive impact fractures or strangulation marks, the failure to report, failure to seek aid, and instead concealing the body constituted independent criminal conduct. Alongside cause of death determination, the forensic report compiled all related evidence, fabric matching Haley's clothing, hair tie consistent with personal photos, and earring matching dental records. DNA from bone matched Haley's mother's sample with near-perfect concordance, confirming victim identity to legal standards. Integrating scene, forensic and statement data, the report concluded, Haley Brooks died from severe traumatic brain injury leading to immediate unconsciousness and rapid death, occurring on the evening of September 18, 2012, in the Brooks residence garage. The mechanism of death was classified as blunt force head trauma, compatible with the suspect's account, but in no way exonerating criminal liability due to failure to seek help and body concealment. The final report, exceeding 70 pages, was submitted to the prosecutor, formally completing the forensic file and serving as the scientific foundation for prosecution and proof of the full circumstances of Haley Brooks' death in court. The trial of Daniel Brooks took place in early 2023 at Davidson County Courthouse, marking the final phase of a more than decade-long effort to resolve Haley Brooks' disappearance. From the very first day, the jury was informed that the case was no longer a missing person file, but a criminal prosecution grounded in a chain of forensic evidence, technical data, and the suspect's conflicting statements. The prosecutor opened by presenting the overall timeline logic, a structure pieced together from fragmented data recovered by the cold case unit, garage video, GPS data, DNA analysis, phone audio, neighbor testimony, vehicle traces, and Daniel's final statement. According to the prosecutor, while each piece standing alone might lack sufficient weight, combined they formed an irrefutable unified chain. First, the prosecutor presented the garage video, once considered worthless in 2012, but enhanced with modern image analysis technology. It became the opening link in the entire evidence chain. The jury viewed footage capturing two figures in the garage at 8:26 p.m., one matching Haley's body size and the other consistent with Daniel Brooks' build. The prosecutor emphasized that Daniel's initial claim, "I didn't go into the garage that evening," was directly contradicted by clear evidence. Next, the prosecutor presented the ECU GPS data. Using diagrams and rote simulations, they showed the jury the Ford Ranger leaving the house at 8:32 p.m., traveling over 20 minutes to the northwest area of Long Hunter State Park, then returning by 8:57 p.m. This directly contradicted the claim that Daniel stayed home all evening and never drove. Critically, the prosecutor highlighted that the vehicle's departure time precisely matched the moment the video captured an adult figure leaving the garage. The presentation then moved to forensic evidence from the vehicle. The prosecutor displayed microscopic images of soil samples from the truck bed, compared to soil from the body recovery site. Mineralogical analysis proved the two samples matched in composition, structure, and mineral coloration. A specialist explained to the jury that the chance of such similarity occurring randomly was essentially zero. This provided scientific confirmation that the truck had been at the location Daniel specified. The prosecutor continued with trace DNA found on the rear seat, one of the case's most critical pieces. The lab report showed significant concordance with Haley's DNA. Though trace amounts, the expert affirmed the location and degradation pattern were consistent with body contact shortly before the disappearance. The prosecutor asked the jury, if Daniel didn't transport Haley that evening, why was her DNA on the back seat? And why did he deny driving when the vehicle data tells a different story? Neighbor testimony followed. Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Hale took the stand, describing arguing voices, heavy footsteps, the garage light on, and an unusual atmosphere on the evening of September 18. The prosecutor linked each account to the video and the audio recovered from Haley's phone. When the jury heard the restored 11-second clip, rapid breathing, retreating footsteps, and a muffled male voice shouting, the courtroom fell completely silent. The prosecutor stressed that this audio file was recorded at 8:13 p.m., just minutes before the video captured two figures in the garage. Next, the prosecutor presented a detailed timeline map, using projections and 3D simulations to illustrate every movement from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m., the critical window of the case. They highlighted each marker, 8:07 p.m. Haley appears near the back door, 8:13 p.m. Audio file captures male voice, 8:17 p.m. Phone loses connection, 8:26 p.m. Two figures in garage, 8:32 p.m. Vehicle leaves house, 8:52 p.m. Vehicle stops at Long Hunter Park, 8:57 p.m. Vehicle returns. The prosecutor concluded, not a single minute in this timeline aligns with Daniel Brooks's initial statements. Every piece of technical data tells the same story. He was with Haley in the garage. The vehicle was used immediately afterward, and a body was concealed at Long Hunter Park. Shifting to the body exhumation, the prosecutor called the forensic pathologist to testify. The doctor described the skeletal condition, the trauma structure in the left temporal region, and the likelihood of death from traumatic brain injury. Comparative images of the garage tool bench edge from 2012 scene photos showed high similarity to the skull fracture pattern. The jury heard that the impact injury could have occurred exactly as Daniel described in his third interview, but his failure to call for help and instead concealing the body constituted independent criminal conduct. The prosecutor did not emphasize motive, since Tennessee law does not require proving motive for conviction when sufficient forensic evidence and concealment behavior exist. Instead, they focused on the connection between Daniel's actions and legal consequences. The prosecutor closed the argument with three pivotal questions for the jury. If this was an accident, why conceal the body? If there was no guilt, why deny every fact for 8 years? And if he was innocent, why does the entire chain of scientific evidence align perfectly with his movements, actions, and changing statements? The prosecutor then read the relevant statutes. Daniel Brooks was charged with homicide, resulting from reckless conduct and abuse of a corpse under Tennessee law, along with aggravating factors related to perjury, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor stressed that the offenses were not limited to causing Haley's death, but encompassed the entire subsequent chain of actions: denial, deception, body concealment, and evidence manipulation. When the presentation concluded, the jury had before them a complete picture, not based on speculation, emotion, or hypothesis, but on measurable data: GPS, DNA, images, audio, soil, physical evidence, and the suspect's own statements. This formed the most critical legal foundation to guide their verdict in a trial closely watched by the Nashville community. The jury took nearly 8 hours to deliberate before returning to the courtroom, and when the presiding judge read the verdict, the atmosphere fell so silent that the sound of a pen touching paper could be clearly heard. Daniel Brooks was found guilty on 2 primary charges: homicide resulting from reckless conduct for causing the death of Haley Brooks through reckless behavior that led to fatal injuries and then failing to seek medical assistance, and abuse of a corpse for intentionally concealing the body to obstruct the investigation. The court sentenced him to 32 years in prison for the first charge and 6 years for the second, combining the penalties into a total sentence of 38 years with no parole eligibility before the minimum term. When the sentence was fully read, Daniel did not look at anyone. His eyes were empty, like those of a man completely drained of strength. Meanwhile, at the prosecution table, the cold case unit investigators, who had pursued the case for many years, sat quietly, showing no sense of triumph, only a heavy sigh of relief after a long and obstacle-filled journey. After the sentence was pronounced, the presiding judge took time to read a rare summary statement, noting that this was one of the most complex cold cases ever reopened in Nashville, and that the investigation could only reach its conclusion thanks to a combination of modern forensic technology and the relentless persistence of investigators in reviewing past errors. He emphasized that the court recognized Haley's death as the result of a chain of mistaken actions and that the truth had finally been restored, even if very belatedly. Following the conclusion of the trial, the district attorney's office and the Metro Nashville Police Department released a comprehensive summary report of the entire 11-year investigation. The report, over 200 pages long, detailed every phase, from the initial mistakes, such as misjudging the severity of the case, overlooking the potential for video analysis, failing to exploit the vehicle's ECU data, returning the phone evidence too early, and not fully examining witness statements, to the advances in forensic technology that opened entirely new investigative avenues. The report explicitly stated that if in 2012 authorities had had tools for video recovery, machine learning algorithms for gate analysis, and chip reading techniques to extract deleted data, or modern trace mineral analysis modules, the case could have been solved in a matter of months instead of more than a decade. However, the shortcomings in the initial process stemmed not only from technological limitations, but also from an early bias toward the runaway teenager hypothesis. This was a key lesson emphasized in the report. Missing persons cases involving minors must be evaluated under multiple scenarios, not just based on typical behavior patterns. The report also acknowledged the significant efforts of the cold case unit in revisiting every layer of old evidence, discovering unprocessed video footage, extracting GPS data from the vehicle, recovering audio and image files from the original phone, and cross-referencing witness statements that had not been properly exploited in 2012. These steps formed the foundation for connecting overlooked dots into a coherent logical chain, ultimately leading to the location of the body and the cause of Haley's death. After the trial, the case file was returned to the cold case unit to complete the archiving process. The two lead investigators, who had worked the case from the beginning, made one final visit to Long Hunter State Park to document the excavation site and place a temporary marker at the location where Haley's body was found. They described it as a moment that belonged not to the law, but to the respect owed to a young woman whose death had been forgotten for too long in the pages of paperwork. Once the file review was finalized, an internal debriefing meeting was held to draw lessons from the initial mistakes. The investigative team agreed that 3 areas would be reformed going forward. 1. All private camera video must be analyzed with the highest available technology and never given only a cursory review. 2. In every missing persons case, any relevant vehicle must undergo comprehensive examination, including ECU data and GPS. 3. All digital evidence, especially phones, must be retained until the final conclusion of the investigation to avoid premature return. A significant portion of the meeting was devoted to recognizing the role of new forensic technology in resolving the case. Techniques such as soil trace mineral analysis, AI-based motion reconstruction, NAND chip reading, and garage lighting simulation turned blind spots in the old file into clear pieces of the puzzle. Without these advancements, Daniel's final confession might never have surfaced, and Haley's body might still lie silent in Long Hunter Park. When all procedures were complete, the Metro Nashville Police Department issued an official statement: the Haley Brooks case file is closed, resolved. That simple yet weighty announcement brought an 11-year cold case to an end. It marked a rare alignment of justice, science, and the persistence of people who refused to let a teenage girl vanish forever into silence. The story of the Haley Brooks case, a 16-year-old girl who disappeared in 2012 in Nashville and was only found more than a decade later, thanks to modern forensic technology, clearly reflects the challenges facing American society today in protecting minors, handling missing persons reports, and balancing trust among families, communities, and the justice system. One of the most important lessons stems from the authorities' initial error evaluating the case under the runaway teenager assumption. Despite a lack of strong evidence, significantly delayed the investigation. In modern life, where children and adolescents face family pressures, psychological instability, and the risk of domestic violence, the United States is continuously reforming missing persons protocols to avoid subjective judgments like those in 2012. Another critical detail is the downplaying of the garage video, the premature return of Haley's phone, and the failure to exploit the vehicle's ECU data. These reflect an important lesson in today's digital society. Every device, cameras, phones, cars, even smart wearables, can become a life-saving link, and overlooking them means missing opportunities to uncover the truth. Forensic technology in this story is not just a crime-solving tool, it is also a reminder that scientific progress must always be accompanied by professional responsibility. Finally, Daniel's act of concealing the body highlights a painful issue in the United States. Many cases involving domestic violence are hidden due to fear, shame, or a desire to maintain an appearance of normalcy. This story reminds us that silence never protects anyone. On the contrary, it prolongs the tragedy and inflicts further harm on many others. In today's world, encouraging children to speak up when they feel unsafe, building trust within communities, and promoting early intervention in high-risk situations are the most important safeguards against similar tragedies. Thank you for following this painful but necessary journey to solve the case. If Haley Brooks' story touched you, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue shining light on the overlooked corners of unsolved cases across America. See you in the next video, where we keep working together to bring the truth to light and give a voice back to the victims who can no longer speak for themselves.